here are not very good. All right, the meeting was called to order at 6:11. Let's do a roll call.
Mr. Bryce,
Present.
Ms. Wells,
Here.
Mr. Patches,
Present.
Mr. Cantor,
Here.
Mr. Williams, here, Mr. Rowena, here, Ms. Jordan Byron,
Present.
Mr. Mushak, here, Ms. Langalis,
Here.
Ms. Tabashnik,
Here.
and Mr. Schulman.
Here, we have no need to seat alternates tonight since we're not taking any official action. I have a preliminary statement that I wanted to make. Large number of people here tonight clearly indicate that there's enormous amount of interest in the draft zoning regulations and the draft map. So tonight we're holding the first of two public hearings to listen, excuse me, to comments and questions from the public regarding the proposed rewrite of the city's planning and zoning regulations and zoning map. Second hearing is scheduled at the same time on June 28th. It's impossible to imagine that, given the scope and the complexity of this undertaking, that everyone in the city of Norwalk would agree with the recommendations. And that is why we've made the extraordinary effort to seek public comment. Our first step was to hire, after advertising and interviews, a consulting firm experienced in drafting zoning plans. The consultants met with community leaders, city officials, developers, landowners, commission members, land use attorneys, and others in the city before beginning their work. They also reviewed the existing regulations and studied the city's makeup. They then proceeded to develop a draft plan, keeping the recommendations of the POCD, the city's plan of conservation and development, in mind. The plan went through several iterations before it was accepted as a draft. Following that, it was peer reviewed by an independent land use attorney, not from this area. Additional changes were made and it was presented as a draft to the commission. Then followed a series of community meetings in each council district and with community organizations representing the various areas of the city. Postcards were mailed to every household in the city, informing them about the draft regulations and asking them to watch for the time and place of this meeting. At the same time, staff placed all of the material, including the draft regulations and draft map, on the city's website so that everyone would have access to the information. Questions came in from the public and staff responded to each one. As a result, additional changes were made to the draft map, changing several areas in the city back to single-family housing from 1 and 2 family housing. These included Shorefront Park and the Devil's Garden area. Revisions have also been made to the recommended changes in the Golden Hill area. I would not be surprised if we make additional changes as a result of these public hearings. As I said, this process has had more public exposure than any project I can recall in my 53 years in Norwalk. The staff and the commission are committed to hearing from everyone who wishes to speak on this matter. But I also want to go back to my initial comment that no project with this scope and complexity could possibly be expected to be acceptable to everyone in the community. While we recognize that no such project can be expected to be perfect, I believe that the staff, led by Steve Kleppen, and the members of the commission have presented a draft that we're proud of and that will likely, with additional changes, serve the best interests of the city. With that, let me explain our process for public hearings. We have the same process regardless of the size or importance of a project. Mr. Kleppen will give a fairly brief presentation. The commission members are certainly free at that point to ask any questions of him that they wish. Once he has completed his comments, we will open it up to the public. There are a lot of people here. Typically, we do not set time limits on how long you can speak. However, given the number of people who may wish to speak, I am going to use some discretion. I ask that you please limit your remarks to no more than 5 or 10 minutes. For example, if you live on a street and you're not happy with the recommendation for the zoning on that street, I think a simple statement to that effect can be made. We will hear it. And to go on longer than the few seconds or perhaps few minutes that it might take to make that statement will not serve your interests, will not serve our interests, and will not serve the interests of giving everybody an opportunity to speak this evening. I am sure that we have some people on the Zoom call who also would like to speak. However, the hearing next week is going to be held in the council chambers, a smaller venue. And as a result, we would like to give as many of you who are here tonight an opportunity to speak so that we don't overwhelm the council chambers next week. So what we're going to do is have 2 speakers from this group speak, and we will then ask someone on the Zoom call who wishes to speak. Then we'll go back to 2 speakers here. That way, we'll allow more of you who are here this evening to speak than we will for people on the Zoom call. I would remind you that you still have an opportunity to put your comments in writing. This process will not end with the public hearing next week. We will be discussing this throughout the summer months. In all likelihood, we will have a final public hearing in September before we take any action. And with that, I'm sorry. We ask to please identify yourself and give us your address. We also ask that you make your comments in a polite manner. If not, unfortunately, we will have to cut off the microphone. I will say that this has not been a problem in the past, and I expect it will not be a problem this evening. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Kleppen.
Sure. Can everybody hear me in the back? It's good? Okay, all right. And I'll try to be brief because I know there's a lot of people that wish to speak. And I'm going to run through some of this.
Steve, I'm sorry. Before you do, there is a sign-up sheet.
There's more.
Pardon me?
Yeah, we have one, there's more, if you need to sign in, there's a sheet over there. If you have already signed in, we have the names here, but
Right,
anybody else additionally. And also, if you don't wish to stand, there are seats up front if you prefer to sit.
right. And if you don't want to sign up to speak and decide after everyone else has had a chance that you wish to, that's fine too. We are going to take a 10-minute break at 9 o'clock. And we are going to end this meeting at 10:30.
Okay, so this, as I mentioned, I'll try to go through this quickly as possible. If you've attended some of the meetings or watched anything online, you've probably seen some of this before, so I apologize if any of it is repetitive. So kind of going to go through three topics, one being kind of the purpose, intent, and why we're doing things, big picture items, and then talk about, where we go from here, which kind of the chairman just touched on, so I'll be very brief on that. So kind of why we're doing this in general. So anybody who's used Norwalk's current zoning regulations know they are not well put together. They've had piecemeal changes done to them since they were first adopted. It's been a lot of project by project basis. So our zoning is responded to something where someone's brought into the city as opposed to the city kind of outlining how they want the city to develop over time. So we're hoping to correct that with the new code. Right now we have over 31 zones, including 5 separate single family zones. The new zoning proposes to knock that down to 14 different zones, plus what's called an overlay zone, which an overlay zone might mean that there's additional oversight within a particular zone. And the whole idea with the zoning code as well is to try to make it more simple to use, more graphics based, have more tables and more clear language. The map on the left is the existing zoning map and it's zoomed out, no need to try to focus in on it. But what you see circled on the left-hand side is the existing number of zones. So that table there shows all the different zones. Looking at the graphic on the right, that's a zoom in area of a little bit of Main Avenue. What happens on Main Avenue, as just an example, there are as many as like 6 different zones in a very short area. So you can go from a single family zone to a commercially zoned area, to a 2-family, to a single, to a multi, to an industrial. So there's no rhyme or rhythm as to why that was ever established there. So the new code looks to simplify that, clean it up, and make sense of this so it's easier for all users. Some other reasons that we're looking at updating the zoning regulations is, as the chairman mentioned, in 2019, the city completed what's called the Plan of Conservation and Development. That's a 10-year planning document that's mandated by state statute. Ours was adopted in 2019 and has seen a couple small modifications since that point in time. Within that plan, there's a future land use map, which provides some guidance on if and when you decide to change the land use within your municipality. It gives recommendations on what that should be. So it's a good idea to update your zoning when after you've updated your plan. So the city looks to sorry about that, froze. There we go. The city looks to develop in certain areas we've identified, that came out of the planning process. And those are based upon where we have mass transit facilities, where we have significant employment centers, where we have our, significant infrastructure. And I would call this really just a common sense approach. So kind of working from north to south, from the top of the map down. Up at the very top is the Merit 7 area, where there's a new train station about to be opened up. That's the largest concentration of Class A office space. Further south, we have the West Ave Wall Street corridor, which is kind of Norwalk's historic downtown. We also have a bus hub there, where the city probably sees the most development now, which is pretty obvious if you drive through there, which would be South Norwalk, which is really centered along the train station. And that area was kind of prompted for development starting back 2018 timeframe, and it's kind of picked up some steam since then. 2 other areas that we've kind of identified as kind of areas where we should develop further. One is East Norwalk, and that's obviously to a lesser extent than in other areas. And then the Route 1 corridor, which would consist of Westport Ave and Connecticut Ave. So the existing zoning code we have is called Euclidean zoning, and that's kind of the standard of what most communities do now, and that's based off an old court case from a long time ago, which basically allowed municipalities to regulate uses within a community. So the idea being, if I own single family house, somebody can't put a slaughterhouse or a gas station next to me. There's got to be rules on determining what uses can go in what areas. There's some other kind of approaches and some more, I'd say, bigger thinking approaches, and we're kind of adopting a model in between, something that's called form-based code. Form-based code focuses less on use. It does regulate use and determining what uses can go in certain areas, but it's not the driving factor in determining what you can do on the property. It's kind of thinking about it from the perspective of the pedestrian or the street view and what you actually view and encounter and experience on the street. And form-based code is very heavy graphics based and table based, so it's a little more intuitive in terms of what you see. Form-based codes are worked on what's called a transect. So this is kind of the model that our consultant uses. So on the far left here is what's called CD1. So in Norwalk's case, CD stands for community district. We don't have any CD1 zoning in Norwalk. CD1 zoning would be like if you're out in Montana on a 50-acre ranch, that would be something like CD1. Where Norwalk starts to come into the transect is where we get to this CD3, which is kind of a more or less of a suburban zone. And then it progresses in density as you go up, where CD5 is that South Norwalk area I was talking about. That's a pretty dense urban environment. There's also beyond CD5, there's like a CD6, that's Manhattan. We don't have anything proposed like that in the city. There's also special districts where we deal with like the industrial zones, the hospital zone, and also we have a civic zone which handles municipal and governmental properties. So here's an example of what the new code looks like. On the left, this is kind of the preamble text that you would see with any zone. This happens to be the CD3 zone, which I'm sure will be a hot topic of conversation tonight. That CD3 zone allows 1 or 2 family uses. The next table of, the next page of the code kind of goes into some familiar terms that you guys might see, setbacks, height, how far buildings can be located on a property. That's all familiar language. That text itself is pretty similar to what we see in the existing code today. I mentioned use tables. So the current zoning regulations, if you've opened them up, is basically just a big list of all the things you can do in a property. The new regulations break things down into a table. Across the top is all the zoning districts. And then on the bottom are all the uses, and the uses are categorized together, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial, could be retail. And there are 4 designations within the table. One is P, which is permitted. NP is not permitted. SP could mean, PL would mean that it's permitted with limitations. And at the end of the table are all the uses that have limitations, and it tells you what those limitations are. Or SPU would mean special permit use. And the special permit means it's required to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission for a public hearing. There's neighbor notification and additional standards that are applied. I mentioned the new regulations are pretty heavily graphics based. So there is a building typology for each type of building within the code. This is just an example of some of the residential buildings. And this is just a zoom in on, so some of this should be a little bit self-explanatory. The graphic on the left is a house. Obviously, we don't know what that is. Whereas the one on the right is a duplex. And those would be 2 house types that are allowed within the 1 or 2 family zone. So some big picture changes that occur with the regulations. If you're in what's known as the AAA zone now, which is kind of like I would say on the more perimeter of the city, there really aren't a lot of changes to those areas. The name changes, but there aren't a lot of wholesale changes. And that's because those areas, by and large, they're on septic, they have private well, they're not serviced by infrastructure or transit. So it doesn't really make sense to add density out in those areas. There is consolidation of what's known as the A zone and the AA zone. Those are both single family zones. As I mentioned, which I think we'll spend a lot of time talking about tonight, is a proposed consolidation of a lot of what's known as the B residence zone with the existing C residence zone. The C residence zone allows 1 and 2 family, where the B is single family only. So the B zone, I don't know if it was 50-50 or close to 50-50 based on where it was located. A lot of that went to the new CD3 zone. Some of it went to the new CD3S zone, which is a single family zone. So what we're hoping to accomplish with some of these changes, particularly when it gets to the form-based aspect of things, is more uniform design over time. And another aspect with the CD3 zoning for the 1 and the 2 family is the potential to have additional home ownership. So if you have a 2-family house, technically you can do a condominium where one person can own one half, the other person can own the other half, which, you know, if you're thinking about entering the housing market, a typical single family house is a lot more expensive than buying half of a duplex. In those zones, currently, all the single family zones allow what's called accessory dwelling units, or we call them ADUs. Those have been on the books in Norwalk for a long time. The regulations were revamped last year and again, a little bit tweaked earlier this year. And the big change I would say with that was accessory dwelling units can now be detached versus solely being attached previously. So one thing we did, and I'll show you on a map in a second, we've consolidated really what's become the urban core of the city, which is going from South Norwalk up towards Wall Street area. There were many overlapping zoning designations in that area, so it made sense to consolidate them and keep it a little more unified. We've consolidated West Ave, not West Ave, Westport Ave, Connecticut Ave, and Main Ave into what's now called CD4C. It's really one commercial corridor. So it made sense to work on that as one consolidated entity. One thing I hope will happen over time, and when I'm saying time here, it could be 30 years, it could be 40 years, is if you drive down Westport Ave or Connecticut Ave and you hit the Westport border, you hit the Darien border, the look changes quite a bit. And the only reason it changes is because we've allowed it to look this way in Norwalk, where we end up with a big sea of parking in the front. We get very, you know, I'd say not very attractive signs. You get a lot of buildings that aren't overly attractive. So the idea with the form-based code is it will require the buildings to be close to the street, where the parking for the most part will be to the rear and to the side. Signage will be unified, curb cuts will be lessened, and the building designs will hopefully be improved. So these are going to be, you know, changes that come over decades because it's going to happen when the properties transfer and there's a new user on those properties. So this is just a quick getting back to what we're consolidating with the urban core. This map on the left is the proposed zoning. This purple corridor is what we're defining as the urban core. The map on the right is the existing zoning. And you can see from this same area going from South Norwalk up to Wall Street, you have 6, 7, maybe 8 zones, and they all kind of do the same thing with very similar standards. So we've consolidated them and have kind of made it just a little easier to use going forward. I talked about the West Ave, Connecticut Ave thing, so I can skip that now. There is, I mentioned it briefly, the creation of the civic zone, and that's really meant to handle governmental properties, whether that could be the taxing districts or it could be state of Connecticut land, city of Norwalk land. And it's meant to provide some flexibility to the municipality by also protecting abutting neighbors, because we know that's a big concern. If you're in like a single family neighborhood and they're going to city-owned property next to you and say, for example, the city's going to put a school, you want to make sure that, you know, the school's not 10 feet off your property. So there's standards that work both ways. Some other changes, I'm just going to rattle these off very quickly. We're regulating height a little differently because you perceive height by the number of stories, not by numerical feet. But the standard is very similar to what it is today. We're no longer regulating lot coverage. We're looking at what's called impervious surface, and that's looking at how much ground cover there is in total. And it's really meant to be a water improvement drainage facility. And right now, our regulations are very vague on lighting. They have no standards regarding grading, vegetation, or tree removal. So if you've ever had anybody that's built next to you or torn a house down and redeveloped property and you've had runoff issues, these regulations will provide protections that currently don't exist. A big driver from the commission, as well as from Common Council, has been looking at providing more sustainability into the regulation. So there's a whole section on sustainability. We've made pretty significant renovations to the flood zone regulations. Norwalk has some pretty strict flood zone regulations, and I think, from my perspective, that's a good thing. But, we do hear a lot of concerns that they are too strict, so we've lessened those up quite a bit. And we've also put in increased public notification, because that comes up quite a bit, where somebody says, after something's already construction, I didn't know anything was going on over here. So we've put in additional standards in terms of notification. So as the chairman alluded to, and this is my last slide, I promise, we've kind of been wrapping up the outreach meetings. We have, I think, one more scheduled with a private group next week. This is the first of 2 public hearings, one again next week on the 28th. And I think we're looking, there'll be at least one hearing, probably the end of September, early October, where the commission will kind of go yay or nay to all the changes and the comments that we hear. And at some point after that, they'll take a vote. And we're looking for a tentative adoption date or effective date for January 1 of 2024. And that concludes my comments, and I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we'll now open it up to the public again. I'll remind you, just give us your name and your address. And we ask that you show us the same courtesy that we have and will show to you. With that, Brian, you have the list?
So the first speaker is Brian Go.
No, first speaker is, we offered that spot to the mayor.
Oh, no, I apologize. You go first.
Oh, good evening. And first of all, thank you for your service, what you do. I know it's a very challenging position, having been on the zoning commission in the past. I know you've got a daunting task ahead of you. I'm here tonight to talk about some of the things that I've heard from many of the people behind me. I have serious concerns about 2 parts of the proposed zoning changes. One, converting a single-family home area to 2-family home, and this 2-family home two-family homes to multifamily. I really haven't heard anything else about many of the other things, which I think there are a lot of good things being proposed. As I said, I know that the current zoning regulations are absolutely needing a rework. They're convoluted, they're not navigable, they're not user-friendly. But I've dealt with consultants in the past, and I know that the consultants did a lot of outreach, but I also know that sometimes consultants take a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. And I don't think that they really looked at some of the unique neighborhoods in the city of Norwalk. And I understand the concerns. I certainly understand the concerns of the people behind me. They have the neighborhoods that they've been living in for decades, some people, and they're concerned about what's going to do to their neighborhood. So what I've spoken to Mr. Schulman and a few others here. What I'd like to see is kind of not such a rush into a final product. Take a step back, look at what's happening. Take a step back and really sit down and take a look at what is appropriate for the city of Norwalk. I know that you all have the interest of Norwalk in your minds and in your hearts, as we all do. And I know that tonight, all the people that will be speaking, I'm pretty sure I can get an idea of what's going to be said tonight. But I know you're going to listen to them and take their concerns into consideration as well. So again, thank you for your service. I know it's a very challenging position. And again, I think too much too soon is the wrong way to approach this. And I hope that you'll consider my comments and the others as well. So thank you.
Before the next speaker speaks, comment about the cheering, the applauding. It only takes away from the amount of time we have for you to speak. We do have a hard stop at 10:30. To the extent that there's extended applause, which by the way, does not affect us. I mean, we have decisions to make based on the facts, not on the number of people we're facing tonight, not on the applause and cheers. And yelling at us does not serve your interest either. We've asked that you please behave politely. We're committed to doing the same. First speaker, please.
Lou, is staff, do you want the staff going to be commenting, answering people's questions in order to close
I
loops
think as
faster?
necessary.
As necessary.
Hi, how you doing? I'm Brian Goff, live at 3 Stepping Stone Road. Was born in this town. I lived here longer than everybody on at this table. Number one, there was two-family changing single-family zoning into two-family zoning. There's no room for it. If everybody drives here, I can't get from where I live by the golf course to the beach. It takes me sometimes 45 minutes. There's too many cars and not enough room in this town. We're full. There's no discussion about that. I would like each one of you to take a ride over this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and drive down Ferris Avenue to see that street is completely two-family. Drive down it and see if you can get down the street, number one. A big thing here, when we pack all these people into the city, who's building a new reservoir to supply water? Who's gonna put the new sewage treatment plant in? Who's gonna pay for it? We are. And you just can't pack, 5 pounds, the old saying, you can't put 10 pounds of this into a 5-pound bag. And that's what you're trying to do here. There is absolutely no more room, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, in this town. I'm sorry. I'll end up quickly. The East Norwalk project, I read about that. Now, that whole area, are you just gonna use eminent domain and kick people out of their houses to bring strangers into this town and put them in two-family apartments or buildings that have 15? I've read some of the specs on it. Now, I was in the construction business all my life. I don't know about the roads. There's no room. This stuff, changing a few zonings, little regulations and stuff is fine. But when you start putting multi-family houses in, parking is the huge problem. How many spaces in the two-family zones do each apartment get? 1.5 spaces? Or is it 2 or 3 or 4? There's cars parked all over the road now. Where my mom used to live on Bird Road around the corner from Ferris Avenue, there's 10 people living in a house. There's cars all over the place. And nobody enforces it. Get them off the road. Yeah. So, I don't know if it's preordained, but there's a lot of people here that don't like it. And I know that for a fact. And a lot of people aren't going to show up, but I know tons of people in town that think it's kind of a dumb idea to get so many people here because it's just too damn crowded. Thank you.
Next is Mark. Thank you.
I won't take that next, don't worry about it. Good evening, my name is Mark Liljedahl. I'm a resident of Norwalk for 73 years. 40 of those years have been in East Norwalk. I've seen a lot of things go on in this town and it's very interesting. I happen to agree with the mayor that he ran on a platform that the zoning hadn't been taken care of in 30 years. Hadn't been reviewed in 30 years, which is a good idea to review it. But I think it's been a little rushed to judgment. I agree with the mayor on that. We had a consulting firm that you worked with that probably made the same recommendations to 10 other towns that they did to us. So I think without some specifics on each of their areas that people are talking about, I think it's a little hasty to make some of the judgments that we have. I'm here specifically to talk about Ludlow Manor. You want to change Ludlow Manor from a single family street into a multifamily, 2-family house street. And I got to tell you something. I don't know how many of you have walked down Ludlow Manor. but it is an absolutely beautiful street. It's a one-family street. And currently now, it is the most affordable one-family street in East Norwalk. And that's what you want. You want affordability in Norwalk. Isn't that correct? That's what you're looking for with all the plans you have right now? Currently, it's the most affordable one-family house in East Norwalk. And several of the neighbors in East Norwalk have written in on Ludlow Manor. And I want to read you the responses. The same response came from every single person that wrote in. The response was, Ludlow Manor is currently zoned as a B residence. It is directly adjacent to C residence on the west and A residence on the east, being in proximity to the East Norwalk train station and size lots being consistent with CD. This is what it ended with. It makes sense. So you are making decisions on residents, where they live and how they live, because it makes sense. Well, who does it make sense to? Does it make sense to you? Does it make sense to the residents who live there? That's where I have some problems. Now, if you walk down Ludlow Manor, and I would ask any of you, if you haven't walked down Ludlow Manor, you'll know what it looks like. And how could you make a decision on changing from a single family to a two-family if you haven't seen the street and what it's about? Now, you take Ludlow Manor and walk down it, and then you go over a 3-minute walk, to Marion, to Wallace, to Norman, and the street looks exactly the same as it does Ludlow Manor. They're AA. Nothing's going to happen with them, a 3-minute walk. You talk about being the transit district, being able to walk to the train station. I see people all the time walking there from that area. And that's one of your prerequisites for that one. So how can you take that little sliver and put that there? What's the common sense about doing that one? I doubt if the addition of 2-family homes on Ludlow Manor is going to make any difference to Norwalk. I doubt that. I doubt that. It's not going to happen, but it will change forever one of the nicest streets in Norwalk. Think about that as you're doing it. Common sense, not sense, but common sense about what you want to do. I have seen and read all the material, and yet I have not seen one logical explanation other than it makes sense to take Ludlow Manor from a B and put it there, and yet all the other areas around it are multifamily houses right now. They already exist. They exist. You're not going to change those. You're changing one street to a multifamily home from a single family because it makes sense. Well, I respectfully request this commission to use some common sense, go out and take a look at it, and then make your decisions. Thank you very much for the evening.
Thank you.
Kathleen Lesko, remote. If you can unmute. Kathleen, if you could unmute.
God.
There we go.
Hello, I'm Kathleen Lesko. I currently live in a triple A zone, but I'm speaking for the whole city of Norwalk. I've lived in Norwalk for over 30 years now. And my husband was born here. His parents are still here. We love the town the way it was 30 years ago, and we still love it, but it's gotten too crowded. And the only thing I want to say is there should be no ability to change a single family to a multifamily or a single family to a 2-family without full approval of the homeowners. The biggest issue is homeowners' values are going to go down, and they bought their home based upon the zoning. So there should be no ability to change that. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
All right, our next 2 speakers, I'll call 2 up at a time. Lou DeCanto and then Simon Sundberg.
Good evening. My name is Lou DeCanto. I own a home at 13 Saddle Road in Norwalk in the B resident zone. You're currently proposing to change neighborhoods that are from Newtown Avenue to Dry Hill Road through the college streets into Saddle Road into 2-family housing. I'm very certain that everybody in this room, including this board, has bought your house or decided to live where you like to live. By changing the demographics of a neighborhood, you change it. I understand that the zoning regulations need to be cleaned up. It's a good idea. I think it is very simple. I've been reading the regulations. The difference is you change an area from single family to two family. You're now changing the type of ownership of the buildings. Now they become investment properties. Now they become something that other people can make money on. You're not going to create any more affordable housing. What you're going to create is a business. Now, I understand we need affordable housing, and we would like our grandparents or children to live someplace where they've always lived before. I think the ADUs are a great idea. I think that's perfect for letting an owner stay in their property instead of being pushed out. Okay, but you are going to change what the people do in their houses. I own multifamilies myself. I cannot sit on my properties and watch what every person does in the neighborhood. But it will change those neighborhoods where you chose to live in a quiet, family-oriented neighborhood. Okay, it makes no sense to change them to two-family neighborhoods. It changes absolutely what everybody will do. They'll take their houses, they'll split them in half, they'll put multifamilies in them. Parking will become a problem because renters do not care where they park. Your TOD district has already had an impact in my East Norwalk neighborhoods where I own other properties, where the developers charge for parking on their sites. And now I have to police them coming to my public parking or my parking lot in my private property. Parking is a big problem. This is not New York City. People do not walk everywhere. They go to the grocery stores, the doctors. They all have two cars. It doesn't make any sense to create more crowded, more parking, like some of the people are saying. Drive down those neighborhoods in the B zones, and on the weekends, try and look at all the cars. Everything that's on the street already. Imagine shoveling those cars out in the snow. It makes it a nightmare. I was a public servant in the city for 25 years. And if you're trying to get a fire truck down a road that's already crowded, somebody's life is going to be in danger. I'm done. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name's Simon Sundberg. I live at 11 Highview Avenue. We bought our house in '79. It was a B zone. And actually, it was a B zone from 1929 till '79, 50 years. And now we've owned it 44 years. So we have 94 years of reliance upon a B zone, that this house would be a B zone. And when we bought the property, we purposely bought in a single family zone. We looked at two family zones and we didn't want to live there. So I don't want to repeat what everybody else has said, but I can tell you that revising the code is a good idea. I was an assistant corporation counsel from '86 to '88 and from 2002 to 2006. And zoning was one of the departments I covered. And in the last zone change, which was '87, '88, I was the one who wrote the brief for the city. I defended the city, which we won. The thing that's bothering me is simply with a broad brush, changing a single family zone to a multiple family zone. That just changes the character of the entire neighborhood. I live on Highview. There are no two family houses there. Overlook, perpendicular to our street, no two family. Clearview runs parallel to Highview, no two families. Birch down the street, no two families. Walnut, no two families. Chestnut, no two families. Park Hill, I don't think there are any, but it's a single family zone. And the only place that you see multiple family is when you drive up Bettswood, where the island is. There's a single family house and it's now a rental. You hardly ever see the same four cars there. You see an assortment of trucks there. You see an assortment of trucks that have bedding in it, parked there. I've seen trucks where the guy's literally on the street changing his brakes. It just gives a different feel to the neighborhood. And I think it would be a mistake to change the tenor of my neighborhood. I don't think it's warranted. I don't think it's a good idea. And if you're talking about form, well, the form of the neighborhood is a single family. Why introduce a completely different form of ownership? It just doesn't make sense. If it doesn't make sense, you probably shouldn't do it. The zoning regulations do need to be revised. I can tell you, I've worked with them. They're, I can't say they're a nightmare, but try and make sense out of them. It's like trying to make sense out of the 64 hexagrams of I Ching. It's very, very complex. So that's a good idea. Yes, make those changes, but don't change the character of selective neighborhoods. That's just not the right thing to do. Thank you.
I'm blank. If you could unmute, please state your name and address for the record.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Great. Adam Blank, I live at 49 Bartlett Avenue here in Norwalk. And I wanted to speak to you on in three separate hats. So first, I want to talk to you just briefly, and am I able to share my screen, Brian or Steve, or am I not able to do that?
No, Adam.
Okay. I'm counsel to Sono Wharf, RBA Properties, and their owner, Keith Brown. Keith lives here in Norwalk. His company's owned and developed a number of properties that have a focus on historic preservation in South Norwalk over the last 40 years. Most recent was the assemblage of land and preservation of the shirt factory on Chestnut, which is now being developed by Spinnaker. Another project that RBA Properties ran was the Haviland Gates, which was the historic preservation and housing development on Haviland Street. Sono Wharf owns a number of properties on Chestnut Street in South Norwalk, including 57 Chestnut Street, which is the 1910 historic mill building, which you know from the kombucha, East Coast Kombucha and Space Cap Brewery are in there. We've talked, when you did the industrial zone change, I did speak to you about the change of zone for that particular property. It is currently zoned light industrial. It's actually the only industrial zone property on Chestnut Street in your proposed zoning regs. The 57 Chestnut and the contiguous parcels that are owned by Sono Wharf extend on the backside of Chestnut directly up to the train station. They're about as close to the train station as you can have development. And those, in our view, should certainly be zoned in the CD5 or what was the SSDD zone. This again was raised at your industrial zone meeting, and there was, I think, pretty much agreement that it would make sense to rezone that to the SSDD or the CD5 zone. It didn't happen at that time. It was decided to hold off onto the overall zoning rewrite to do that. So I'd ask you, number one, to rezone that. When you look at the map, rezone those parcels to the CD5. I have submitted a letter outlining that. Chestnut Street's not really well suited for contractors' vehicles and truck traffic. Again, it's the only parcel there. It's primed for a mixed-use development, which would obviously include the preservation of the 57 Chestnut historic building and those users. So that's point number one. Number two, I will submit something in writing in coordination with Bruce Beinfield's office and Spinnaker concerning what I'm going to call this sort of 100-foot width rule. I've talked with your staff about it, but I want to make sure that you're aware of it and that it is considered and hopefully changed prior to the final version of the regs coming out in the CD4 and CD5. And you've got some like other, like CD4W, CD4C, and all of those zones, your regs propose that a building lot can be no wider than 100 feet. And if your lot is wider than 100 feet, you are required to break it down into separate building sites, none of which can be larger than 100 feet. And each has to independently act as a project or a site, each one with its own building and its own amenities and parking. The idea is to make, the logic behind it is that it helps make a more walkable city, right? You don't want to have these giant block killer buildings in your town that make your city unwalkable. And again, we'll submit to you a fair amount of information about what makes a city walkable and what doesn't. And absolutely, building sort of length is one of those things, but there's quite a laundry list of what makes a pleasant experience walking and what makes an unpleasant experience. And the 100-foot wide width doesn't really work. It's most of the lots already exceed 100 feet. So you've got all these pre-existing non-conforming lots that are going to be almost impossible to regulate. You've got all the buildings. If you look at Ironwork, the One Cemetery building, the platform on Chestnut, all of those were really designed to be walkable. We'll submit part of the presentation we gave on One Cemetery about walkable cities and what those criteria are. None of those are anywhere close to being 100-foot lot width. Those are like 300-foot lot widths. Additionally, you're not able to, because our streets and our infrastructure is already in place, you're not going to have a 100-foot lot and then like a 100-foot block. There's not going to be a street there. You're going to have another building that's 100 foot. So you're not, if you're creating a city from scratch, you might want to have 100-foot square blocks with streets, but we're not going to be doing that. So it loses a lot of the benefit of this 100-foot width. Additionally, so for lots that are 110 feet or 140 feet, there you've got to break their lots down into two buildings, which would have to be either super narrow buildings or you'd have just unusable space in your urban core, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And additionally, most of the newer, bigger building construction is a sort of a pedestal layout where you've got parking on the ground floor with the building above. When you do that, those are that parking layout. You've got a 19-foot long parking space. Then you've got a 20-foot wide drive aisle, and then on the other side, a 19-foot parking space. It's a total 62 feet. That's what you need to get your minimum. And so in all of these buildings, what they actually are is they're a double. So it's two. So it's a minimum of about 128 feet. Plus you have some buffer on each side. So you can't even park your building with a 62-foot. If you're limited to 62 feet for the parking, the numbers just don't work. Anyway, I'm going to submit something in writing on that with them that you'll have with some examples and some illustrations, but I ask you to, give some consideration to changing that proposed rule. And then finally, I just in my individual capacity as a Norwalk resident, who by the way, lives in a B zone that's proposed for 2-family, and I live in a single-family home. But I'll go with the will of the people on that one. I don't particularly have a strong preference on it. But I have submitted just today a lengthy letter that I'm not going to go through point by point of concerns with the proposed regs, many of which are easily fixable, some of which I may be wrong about, some of which are just typos, but it's about 8 pages in length. A few things that I want to just highlight for you under the proposed reg changes. If you have an approval under the existing regs, that approval will expire, will only be valid until its quote expiration date. And I think you really should consider explicitly saying that the commission can grant an extension, which is what you historically do when projects aren't completed by the day of their expiration, whether it's a CAM application, a site plan, or a special permit. that you can retain the ability to grant an extension even when these new regs come into effect, because some of those time periods are very short. I also just want you to be aware, if you haven't recognized it, that in these proposed regs, you can only have one structure. I mean, you could have a garage on a single family house, sure, but generally speaking, you can only have one structure on a lot. So things like at One Cemetery, that East Norwalk development has 2 buildings. That's not allowed. 10 Willard is an apartment building and self-storage. That wouldn't be allowed. 71 Connecticut Avenue is the same situation, wouldn't be allowed. Head of Harbors, 2 buildings, that's not allowed. All of the elderly housing that's been at 40 Fulton and on Richards Avenue that's gone up, that are really sort of like single family buildings on a lot, that's not allowed. If you have
Adam, can you wrap it up, please? You're over 10 minutes.
You've got on amenities in the East Norwalk Village District, any amenity has got to be clearly identified as available for public use, but the amenities include things like solar panels. So, I think that needs to be clarified, that not all amenities need to be for public use. You've got
Attorney Blank,
yes.
I'm gonna ask you to end your presentation at this time. If there is more time at the end of this hearing, we'll allow you to speak again. If not, you're welcome to come back to our hearing next week. And we look forward to receiving your written comments.
Okay. Thank you.
The next 2 speakers are Paula Solano and then Tanner Thompson.
Hello, my name is Paula Solano and I live at 14 Charles Street. And fun fact, I decided to walk instead of drive because it took me less time, because I have to go to East Ave. I actually do not live in, my street is already zoned for 2 family, but I agree with the other gentleman. There's no room left in Norwalk. There's no room. You can't drive anywhere. And if you live in East Norwalk right now, somebody just go outside and drive down to the beach. It'll take you 20 minutes. When you get past exit 16, the people who live in East Norwalk can't get out to East Avenue in 1 light, in 10 minutes, in 5 minutes, and it's that way all the time. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Hello, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm Tanner Thompson. I live at 16 Hillside Place in the Golden Hill neighborhood. I'm the chair of the city's Bike Walk Commission, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the commission today. I am trying to speak on behalf of a demographic that is a little bit underrepresented in this room, and that's young people. The majority of Norwalk residents are under 40. I would ask you rhetorically, how many of the people in this room are under 40? I'm 29. I have not lived here for 50 years. I have not lived here for 29 years, but I may well live here another 50 years if I can afford to stay here. I have a lot invested in the long-term future, and everyone my age does too. So I hope you'll consider us in our future as you design these regulations. First, I'm going to agree with one of the major sentiments that's in this room. Almost everyone in Norwalk drives. There's about 1,000 households that don't have a car, but about 96% of transportation in Norwalk is done by car. But why do you think that is? Do people like driving? Do people like sitting in traffic? Everyone I talk to says that they would walk more or bike more or take transit more if it made sense, but given the way that our city is built, it doesn't make sense. Most amenities are clustered along Route 1 or other high traffic arteries, separated by massive parking lots. Most housing is too far from daily needs to make anything but driving convenient. Even new apartments that are built close to stuff are built with either massive parking lots or massive parking garages or both, which brings new cars into our city, new people with cars, and makes it convenient to drive, and drives up the cost of housing in the process because building parking is expensive. All of these attributes are a direct result of the zoning code that we've had for 30 years, and the zoning code we've had before that, that for decades has made most of the alternatives to these things illegal. This wasn't always the case though. Unlike most of the USA, Norwalk was established long before anybody drove a car, even before people rode a bike or a streetcar or a train or a bus. Norwalk is like 400 years old, almost. It's 1649, right? That's a long time ago. And most of the early growth of Norwalk was the result either of boat transportation or of the railroad and the streetcar. 100 years ago, Norwalk was a thriving city of about 30,000 people where everyone walked places as part of their daily life. And this happened without any sort of zoning code. Our current zoning code and the automobile-centric neighborhoods that it produced are much younger than Norwalk itself, but it's been around long enough to almost entirely eradicate that way of life that was built on walkability. It's led to a housing crisis. So in that one sense, Norwalk is full. The nationwide vacancy rate for apartments is 5%. Connecticut is the highest in the nation at 2%, and Norwalk has the state average beat at 1.5%. So our apartments are absolutely full. On top of that, the zoning code that we've had and zoning codes around the nation have perpetuated the legal, explicit racial housing discrimination that was rampant for decades. The Fair Housing Act prohibited it in 1968, but over 50 years later, Black Americans still own their homes at a lower rate, live in single-family detached homes at a lower rate, and build intergenerational wealth at a lower rate than any other racial group in the USA. And study after study has attributed this to exclusionary zoning. Now, though, with the zoning rewrite, we have the opportunity to get rid of antiquated, arbitrary, harmful rules like exclusionary zoning and parking requirements. We have the opportunity to legalize the building blocks of walkable neighborhoods like townhouses and corner stores. We have the opportunity to legalize in more places housing that's inherently more affordable than a single family home, like duplexes and apartments. In a very literal sense, we have an opportunity to save the original walkable neighborhoods of Norwalk. But more importantly, we have an opportunity to allow Norwalk to literally build a more sustainable future. If we continue with the existing rules, we'll keep moving in the direction of isolating, exclusive, environmentally costly development that we've been building for the last 50 or 70 years. It might not seem like it from the comments that you've heard and the comments that you will hear tonight, but this is not an unpopular perspective. A poll done by Zillow of, I think, 14,000 American adults who was cited in Fortune show that 82% of people in the nation support allowing multifamily in their neighborhood, multifamily developments. Studies by the National Association of Realtors show that 60% of Americans favor neighborhoods with a walkable mix of houses and stores rather than neighborhoods that require more driving. That number is higher, even higher, among younger generations. Additionally, over 1,400 municipalities in the United States have reduced their parking requirements in some way, and around 40 have completely removed all parking requirements. And this is not just one kind of city either. This includes small towns like Hudson, New York, small cities like Burlington, Vermont, big cities like San Jose, California, or Portland, Oregon, and mid-sized cities like Richmond, Virginia, Hartford, right here, and Buffalo, New York. Just a couple days ago, I could not have asked for this, but Senator Chris Murphy tweeted 2 days ago that Connecticut's housing shortage is our biggest economic liability, and local rules making it hard to build new housing are hurting us. I have specific policy suggestions because I'm a policy nerd, but I will provide them in writing so I can let others speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
George Ekin, can you unmute, please? Please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is George Eichen. I reside at 10 Beechwood Road in the West Norwalk section. I have a couple of specific questions that may or may not be answered tonight. In the existing zones, AAA, AA, and A, group homes and halfway houses are not permitted uses. Yet in 3S, these are now permitted. I know they're important uses, but I think it's inappropriate and inconsistent with single-family residential only zones. I understand you're trying to consolidate, but I think you still need to consider specific uses in certain neighborhoods. So that's question number one, is why. Number two is if those uses, group homes and halfway homes, are permitted in 3S, I question why they're not permitted in 3L. I don't think it should be based on wealth or bargaining power. And I think it was mentioned something about septic and infrastructure. I can't speak for adjacent areas, but in my particular neighborhood, we're septic only. We have no lights, no garbage collection. So there's no infrastructure in our neighborhood. And if that's the case, then maybe our area should be 3S as well. I also understand that B&Bs, bed and breakfast, and Airbnbs will be allowed. And this I really don't understand, because by definition, your definitions, these are commercial uses, very clearly commercial uses. If they are commercial uses, what are they doing in single family only zones? That's all I got. If I can get answers either tonight or another time, Steve has been very helpful. But some of these answers remain unanswered so far. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next two speakers are Paul Fox and Harding Dees.
Hello, I'm Paul Fox. I live at 26 Belden Avenue. And I would like to just make a few comments about the need for affordable walkable housing in Norwalk. I haven't lived in Norwalk as long as some of the people here, but I would really like to be able to afford a house in Norwalk someday. And if things continue as they have been so far, that's never going to happen. I think that some of the changes proposed in the new rules, particularly in CD4, allowing neighborhood commercial, are big steps forward in terms of being able to build walkable neighborhoods. But I think that there's significant risk with the public outcry that these things could be scaled back. And I think that would be a mistake. I think that there's definitely a huge shortage of housing in Connecticut, not just in Norwalk, but especially in Norwalk. And prices have just become ridiculous as a result. There are some specific suggestions that I have. I won't talk about them today in the interest of time. I'll submit them in writing. But I think that the commission should really carefully consider the dire need for walkable, affordable development in Norwalk, and take that into account when making decisions about adoption of the new regulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name's Harding Dies, like somebody dies. I live at 19 Oakfield Road, which is a horseshoe shape off Garner Street between two of the biggest arteries in this city, West Avenue and Fairfield Avenue. First, I'd like to know, who was the Golden Hills spokesperson that you talked about? Because I've never seen them, I've never heard of them, I don't know who they are. And I've lived there for 43 years. And do any of you live in the Golden Hill area? Okay, we have one, fine. I came here as a single person, bought the house because it was in walking distance of a police station, Metro North, grocery store, which no longer exists. It's called a theater now, banks, hospital, interstate. And it was a single family home, which is important because I got married. I've had 3 adult children, 2 of whom are with me tonight. One thing I wanted to talk about is parking where I am. On a Sunday, I have 2 churches at the bottom of the hill. I don't mind if they're there on Sunday. They're very polite people. They come, they go to church
and they leave. But we also have apartments all the way down Garner Street. Each apartment's allowed one car. If they want two cars, they got to pay $40, $50 a month. They come up and park in front of my house, sometimes blocking the driveway. When you had 24 West built, because it was on, this is your zoning requirements and notifications. When they were bringing the trucks in and putting those modular sections in, because it was West Avenue, nobody on Garner Street or Oakfield Road was notified. They parked a dump truck right on my property, which collapsed my sewer. They would not take responsibility even when photographed, and it cost me $15,000 because you couldn't bother to tell me. When they built the mall, they didn't force that construction company to provide parking for its workers all over the neighborhood. Twice I had people towed because they were blocking my driveway. You finally changed the parking zone to Golden Hill, and I don't know why you called us Golden Hill, because Golden Hill's on the other side of Fairfield Avenue. Maybe that's why I never heard from a spokesperson. And the parking authority, which is supposed to come and do that, check the people where the signs are, good luck. They're parking all the way down the bottom of Garfield, 2-3 cars past it. They block the entrance to Walgreens, which used to be a single family home. Boom, now it's Walgreens. We used to have a Chevy dealer, now it's the mall, which, by the way, was vacant for 17 years. If people are worried about 2-family homes, we have illegal apartments all over the place right there. But no one comes and enforces the law. If you make it, you can cover that up by changing the zoning. All of a sudden, they're legal. I don't know why you don't enforce the law. The other thing is, if it's 2-family buildings, they're going to bring in outside developers. I can tell you right now, in East Norwalk, the Wells Fargo Bank closed down. How many people here know that they're going to put in a 72-unit apartment building? Okay, 77. 2 cars per apartment. Where are they going to put the cars? Don't know. And if they start construction for any of these 2-family homes, where are they going to put the cars? Where are they going to park the trucks? Where are they going to park the moving vehicles? I spent 27 years here as a mailman, and I probably know this city better than most of the people on this board. I've seen when construction happens. You go down to row 8 and it's all single family. Construction, you can't get around down there. Construction other places, you can't get around. Traffic flow. Fairfield Avenue, high speed. West Avenue, high speed. You ought to sit on Garner Street, especially with these people that the parking authority doesn't come up and get. You can't go, I can't go up that hill when they're parked there and see around the corner for some guy flying down that hill, because it's an off-camber left-hand corner, so they hug the right side. Somebody's going to die on the front of my Silverado. I don't know. Also, water and waste. You start putting in those families, and I don't know how many apartment complexes around here. I know because they changed all our routes in the post office to take care of these huge apartment buildings. I can't believe they're all filled. And this young gentleman who spoke before me is worried about housing. It's all over the place. It really is right now. And they're still building. They even built one down in a place I didn't think could exist next to the train station. I went down there the other day and said, my God, I'd never seen it before. It sprouted right up. There are people in it. And it's so small, I couldn't park my truck in it. Now, the other thing you were talking about Westport Avenue, Main Street, and Connecticut Avenue. Reason they're built like that is because we are the only town. We're surrounded by towns, Westport, Wilton, Weston, New Canaan, Darien. Box stores aren't allowed. So they all come here. That's a huge part of the problem when you talk about traffic. I know I had to go out into rush hour traffic to deliver mail and come back in rush hour traffic. And I was going through the back streets. So if you're starting to change all this stuff, especially where we are, you're going to have huge traffic problems. And again, I didn't buy that house to turn it into a two-family. I would like you to go up and down that street and see how many families across the street from me. It's a single-family dwelling. They have 6 cars, and that's not just from mama and daddy. Thank you.
Emily Berneman, if you could unmute, state your name and address.
Hello, Planning and Zoning Committee. My name is Emily Berneman, and I live at 1 North Water Street. I want to quickly thank you for your time tonight and all your effort in making Norwalk a city that can accommodate many different kinds of people in the many different walks of life. I was born here in Norwalk, and I moved back recently to a transformed city. There's been incredible progress, and I'm so happy to see it. I've been renting an apartment in South Norwalk for almost 3 years, and I would love to own property and start a family here in Norwalk, but as we've discussed, it's a challenge to find affordable housing. I believe the proposed zoning updates would help people in situations like mine to find more affordable housing and improve walkability and access to public transit that I personally rely on. I have lots of family and friends here in Norwalk, so hearing my own neighbors say that Norwalk is full upsets me tremendously. That's not a reason to exclude anyone from living here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next 2 speakers are Meredith Doyle and then Kathy Olson.
Hi, good evening. Appreciate your time tonight, as I know it's not easy, especially with some people who are vocal. I live at 1 Hickory Road. I'm one of 2 houses on that road in the historic Bettswood Avenue. My husband and I are first-time home buyers. So we are the demographic that you are speaking to and part of the reason why you want to rezone. While I support the need to consolidate the zones, I don't agree with at least the neighborhood that we moved into, and I'm sure very many others as well that you've identified as being changed from single to 2-family. We've moved from Brooklyn. We've been in Norwalk for going on 8 years. We were renting at 10 Ann Street originally, and we specifically sought out this neighborhood and single-family neighborhoods because we wanted to grow our family. And we also wanted to have open space. Coming from the city, going to an apartment, we wanted greenery. And while I understand affordable housing is unfortunately not available for a lot of people in not only Connecticut, but the nation, so far studies haven't shown that upzoning actually produces affordable housing. If anything, it's only proven in the long term that it's provided, as someone else has already pointed out, the ability for investors. And that turns into rental properties. And while, yes, we need more ability for housing that's affordable, nothing in Norwalk rental-wise is affordable. You have a studio that goes for $2,000. And that's on par for what we were paying in New York City just 10 years ago. So I vote no. I would hope that you would consider what a lot of people are saying and echoing. I appreciate your time. And hopefully that you'll revise the map again to have it reflect a little more what the taxpayers and what the citizens of Norwalk are speaking towards you or to you about this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Sorry. Good evening. I'm Kathy Olson. I live in Shorefront Park, 38 Shorefront Park. First, thank you for correcting the two-family zoning in our single-family neighborhood. Given the geography of Shorefront Park, at one time an island, yacht club, and mansion estate, it allows for the preservation of our historical neighborhood so uniquely close to downtown South Norwalk. Limited narrow access points into the park and a 200-year-old circular road naturally places a limit on the park, once comparable to Lockwood Matthews Mansion. It also prevents future legal disputes and zoning litigation resulting from city regulations being inconsistent with the property deeds of Shorefront Park residents. Having said that, I am still very concerned about the over-densification in other single-family neighborhoods in the city of Norwalk, especially as it pertains to residential quality of life and the city's ability to maintain its roads, schools, sewers, and parks due to the increase in population. I strongly encourage the commission to scale back further density plans until such time as the city can get a better handle on its operations and its finances. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have Garrett. Garrett, if you can unmute, state your name and address. Thank you.
How you doing? Hope I'm unmuted. Garrett Friedrichsen, Crooked Trail. Echoing all the responses about the crowded nature of the city. I want to point out a curious statement from the mayor in the beginning. How did we become so crowded in Norwalk? Our mayor's been mayor for how long? How did we get all these apartments? How did this happen? And now he wants to say no? Let's think about that for a moment. Let's not applaud that. Let's scratch our head and figure out how to make a change. This is not about a mayoral candidate, though. This is about all these changes for density. We don't need more density. We need smart improvement in how the city's managed. Applaud the effort to change the rules that need changing. Let's avoid density at all costs. No thought has been put, as far as we can see, on our sewage treatment plant. A lot of talk about the apartments in Norwalk, very little talk about all the sewage that comes from Wilton. Who's coordinating that? Wilton's growing fast. They're putting up Fortress apartments too. Our plant can't handle it, folks. Our roads can't handle it. It's a disaster. Let's slow down. I agree with the mayor on that point. Slow down, stop it. Have some thoughtful change, fix what needs fixing, but avoid density at all costs. Thank you.
Our next two speakers, Gail Balzarak and Urban Mulville.
I am also a resident of Shorefront Park, and I do want to say thank you for reconsidering the change to the zoning in our neighborhood. But we're one neighborhood, and clearly there are many other neighborhoods here tonight that are represented that have similar issues to ours. And I agree with what the mayor said, that this needs to slow down and needs to be thought out more thoroughly. Chairman Schulman, I appreciate your comments at the beginning, but I couldn't disagree more with the utter lack of transparency around this process, the notification, and the ability to participate. So far, with the amount of changes that people are protesting, clearly you did not get enough community input before proposing these changes. And to the younger people who made those very moving comments about the lack of affordability, yes, we ought to address that. But the changes that are being proposed clearly are not going to have that impact. So I think that we need to regroup, retrench, and figure out how we really address those problems in a way that is transparent and involves the community at a much deeper level than what's been done so far. Thank you.
Thank you.
Urban Nova Hill, 50 Quintard Avenue on the front of my house and the dreaded Shorefront Park in the back. I've lived in Norwalk for 75 years. I think the only person rivaling that may be the mayor, but I don't want to give away any secrets. I've got a couple of broad observations to make and then a question to ask. So I served as the chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals for 10 years. I served for a total of 12 years. After 2 years, I was voted chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the spot you're in trying to do this. So my first observation is that you indicated that because this is so complex and so diverse, that there probably are going to be people that aren't happy at the end. I draw a different conclusion, and that different conclusion is this is much too big an undertaking to rezone an entire city that's as complex as Norwalk is in one fell swoop. And I also sympathize with the chairman who urged people not to clap, but listen to the clapping because it will tell you more than what I'm saying. The other thing that I think I always knew, but I certainly learned as the chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals, is that the zoning regulations are a pact between the municipality and the property owners. And they rely on that pact when they choose where they're going to live and the amenities that are going to be around them and the elbow room they're going to have and the distance from their neighbors and the clutter of garbage in the street. And so the portion of these proposals that suggest that the single family residence zones anywhere in the city should become two-family is misplaced and a breach of that pact between the people who bought with the expectation that for the most part, it would stay the same as what they bought into. So I just think there's got to be a lot more thought. I applaud you who are here for being here. I think it's about time every member of this commission be here in person. COVID is over. You got to come out. So my last is going to be a question. The phrase is being used, upzoning. It sounds fantastic, but it's bad because what it means is more density. That's what it's defined by the city planners. Upzoning is to create more density. So I'd like to know from anybody here who knows, who is it that proposed the concept of upzoning Norwalk by name? Can you tell me? Is it our governor? Is it our mayor? Who is it that proposed to the city planners that we upzone Norwalk? Is there an answer?
Oh, go ahead.
Happy to answer the question. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we did a plan in 2019. That plan lays out a roadmap and identifies needs and things that the city needs to address. Housing is. I'll answer if you don't interrupt. That'd be preferable. So there's not a name that somebody didn't say upzone Norwalk. It's not something that was a mandate to do. Looking at housing needs and identifying opportunities for housing is part of our job. It's part of what the plan recommends, and it's part of a daily reality that we deal with. There, you want to believe it or you don't want to believe it, that's fine. There is a lack of housing The multifamily housing that is in the city is full. We have some of the highest housing prices. We have some of the highest housing prices in the entire country and some of the lowest, if not the lowest vacancy rate. Something has to give.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kleppen.
May I add one thing? I apologize for cutting you off. So we hear this kind of, I would call it completely false statement all the time that we're beholden to what Hartford said or what Hartford doesn't do. If you look at what happens in some of the surrounding communities that some of you cited earlier, when they don't follow what the state regulations require, they get hit with a lot of developments that they don't want. So we chart a path that we think is appropriate for the city of Norwalk. And in terms of, so that we're not beholden to what Hartford says or what anybody else says. We come up with what we think is the best recommendation for the city of Norwalk. That's all we do.
Well, thank you for confessing to doing that.
Can you hear me?
You.
Good evening. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I just got off of a council committee meeting. My name is Jen McMurr. I live at 71 Gregory Boulevard. I'm often found sitting on the opposite side of these meetings, listening to constituents, not speaking to commissions. But today I'm here not as a council person, but as a private citizen and a neighbor. As I mentioned, I live on Gregory Boulevard, where we already are zoned for 2 families. So I arguably have no skin in this game, so to speak. However, my children and my neighbors' children often play and ride their bikes on one of the streets threatened to be upzoned, Ludlow Manor. Many of the families here were raised here and have grown up here and decided to raise their own families here. We all know each other and communicate with each other often, with the exception of a couple of renters who come and go throughout the years. Those who have lived here a long time have put down roots and are invested in Norwalk in every sense of the word. We have had renters come and go, and some have been wonderful and become part of the block parties and barbecues and have taken pride in their rental properties. I have other neighbors in the 2-zone family zone that do not keep their property nice, park their cars on the lawns, and let weeds grow all around their houses without any repercussions. I would ask that before we think about adding more 2-family zoned areas, we look at what we are doing to maintain those areas that are already falling by the wayside. We have a very small team to keep up with blight and zoning violations as our city continues to grow, and it sadly shows in many cases. The city is also in the midst of working on an affordable housing plan. I ask, without that, how can we move forward with this plan as it is now, not knowing what sort of impact, negative or positive, it will have on our city and our neighborhoods? East Norwalk in general has undergone a lot of changes in the last 2 to 3 years with the East Village TOD plan, where zones were already changed in a significant way. We have yet to see the outcomes of those changes and whether they will be positive or negative or somewhere in between. I would argue that East Norwalk is a very desired area for a number of reasons, but primarily because of its proximity to the beach. I would further argue that by adding more 2-family homes, you are not adding affordable housing or home ownership opportunities. You are opening up a great possibility for developers and investors to come in and purchase the properties at a premium, make them into 2-family homes and rent them at a premium. I would also encourage everyone on the commission to take a drive down these streets, specifically Ludlow Manor. With the lot sizes as small as they are, I don't even understand why this street and some of the others like Staples Court and Old Saugatuck would be up for discussion to become 2-family zoned. The argument could be made that they are too small, so why include them at all? We don't often scale back once something is voted on and passed, and I doubt this will be any different. I am all for cleaning up the zones and getting rid of pockets, but I would argue that this creates further pockets and undue stress on the neighborhoods I mentioned before, where people have put roots down. Zoning is supposed to protect those very people who look to it for guidance, not lower their property values and create undue stress. We have a few very vocal advocates in East Norwalk. I know they have and will speak out against these proposed changes. I do not fault them for that. But I also would ask that you don't fault the other people who don't often speak out or complain, who are here tonight and have spoken out against some of these changes, like the upzoning to 2-family zones. Just because someone does not speak often does not mean that their voices should not be loud and heard. Please listen and prove to us that we still have a voice in our neighborhoods and our city. Thank you so much.
next two speakers are Vinny Sicitano and Fred Wilms.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. First, I'd like to start by thanking you for all your hard work and your dedication, the time you spent, the thoughtful input you have to put this plan together. It's a very intricate, complicated plan that a lot of people are having difficulty grasping and understanding. So I thank you for your hard work. However, we started this evening off with a protest in front. So that should tell you that something probably went off the rails here, I think. We have so many people that are opposed to so many parts of this proposal. And this proposal isn't just about the upzoning. There's a lot of components to it that a lot of people are unhappy about. We started the evening off with our chairman giving us a description of the various legal firms and zoning experts that were all had input for this plan. Which was very, very good, but we seem to be missing something is that I don't think there was any input from the people behind me. I mean, it doesn't seem like that should have been the starting point for this. The people behind me should have been the starting point. So it doesn't seem like there's any input from them, and I think that's why people are clearly upset. I think if we started with that first, that probably would have been the way to go. I attended one of the district meetings where someone from this commission had asked one of the speakers, how does this plan detrimentally affect your neighborhood? How does this negatively affect your neighborhood? And as public servants, I think the question should have been, how does this plan positively impact our neighborhood? How does it positively make our lives better? How does it improve our quality of life? How does it increase the value of our homes? Shouldn't that be the starting point for any of this, I believe, rather than going at it from another perspective? So it doesn't seem to the average Norwalker that this was guided by them at all. So people are wondering, what's the guide? What's the purpose? Why are we doing this? And we keep using that word density, increased density, increased density. Obviously, the people in this community don't really want that. So I think their input is extremely important. I think we should take them into consideration. So I urge you to listen to the people behind me, to listen to the residents in this community, listen to the Industrial One property owners that we've already had some changes for that. I think it's extremely important. I think we have to remember that you serve the community first, this community. And I don't really understand. I think a lot of people don't understand this explosive growth that we have. It doesn't seem to suit them, or they're not really interested in it. So I would just like to say, once again, I urge you to please take everyone into consideration in what they want our city to be and which way they want our city to steer. And I think that's the most important aspect of any commission in Norwalk, is that we respond to the residents. I thank you very much. I won't be taking much of your time.
Good evening. I'm Fred Wilms and I live at 6 Westview Lane. I can appreciate the hard work that you've put in. When I started serving in government, I spent 5 years on the Zoning Board of Appeals, and certainly aware of the hard work that's involved. And so I want to commend you for your dedicated service. What struck me about this plan, though, when I first took a look at it, was it just seemed like you were trying to take a square peg and stuff it into a round hole. I'm thinking we're a collection of neighborhoods. We're not we're not Stanford, where it seems to be a bit more unitary. We're all these different neighborhoods. And as a matter of fact, if our city history, we kind of came together. We merged East Norwalk, South Norwalk. That's why we have the taxing districts that are residues of that. And that's why we have all these different neighborhood associations and different approaches. So I'm not surprised that we have so many different zones, because it just simply reflects who we are. And what I saw from this report, again, is trying to consolidate a community that maybe isn't designed to be so consolidated. Again, we're not Stanford. We're not. And, it seemed to me, instead of focusing so much on density or upzoning, why don't we focus more on livability? I don't think that was the context of the work that you did, or at least it wasn't apparent to me. And so if you look at things from a livability perspective, then you look at parking differently. You look at traffic differently. You look at infrastructure differently. And so, again, I would, in terms of a practical suggestion, many people have already suggested all these things. Actually, I'll just have two more comments. One is all single family zones should remain single family, all of them. And secondly, I keep hearing about affordability. And yeah, housing prices have gone up, and we know that. But the thing that I recall is that, the state has something called 830G, which is for affordable housing, and each community is compelled to have a 10% of its housing stock to be affordable. On Norwalk, we've always been way above 10%. I think we're at 12, 13% right now, 14 or even 14. I mean, meanwhile, New Canaan, Darien, Westport, Wilton are like what, 1, 2, 3%? So we're doing our fair share. I mean, how high do you want it to go? I mean, seriously, what do you want to go up to 20, 30, 40%? And then my final comment is, I find it amusing when I hear some comments about, if we upzone, that's going to make things better. And I was thinking, well, what community could I think of that has really taken upzoning to the ultimate level? Manhattan. You can't upzone more than Manhattan, I think. I think we would agree on that. Now in Manhattan, are the taxes lower than they are here? No. Is there affordable housing in Manhattan? Can you afford to live there? Well, there you go. Again, thank you for all your hard work. And I appreciate the fact that you're going to take a long time to make a final decision, because I think a lot more thought and effort is needed to be put into this to come up with something that's more appropriate for the city of Norwalk. Thank you.
Rhonda and Craig, please unmute.
Hi, I'm Randa, and with my husband Craig Nelson here in 8 Oldwell Court in East Norwalk, very near the soon-to-be 77 units. Not a fan. Regarding the thing tonight, I can see the intent of making the streets more contiguous, etc. But that's about where it ends. I understand there's years and years of mashing up of zones, and there is some benefit to getting that organized, but obviously there's been a lot of dissemination. And what I'm hearing from the room tonight is there's a common thread from most people, whether they're longstanding citizens. I've been here over 30 years. Or whether it's an aspiring new homeowner. They're all, whether they're longstanding or wannabes, it's traffic. They're all talking about the traffic, the quality of life. Right now, the streets are lined with cars. The zoning rule that exists today of a 12-foot maximum is ridiculous. It prevents people from parking on their own property. It forces them to park in the street. How can we double the cars that are parked on the street now? I mean, there's nowhere to put them. This already impacts our walkability because we're walking around cars that are parked half in their driveway, half in the street. It's already a problem if you try and double the number of people in those single aisle driveways or on the street. There's just no room. That will affect the ability, speaking to the postman earlier, that already affected his life, and now it also affects street sweeping, it affects snow plowing. It would become a nightmare. It would not help our quality of life at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next two speakers, Dan Russell and Lisa Brinton.
Thank you. I did not have anything prepared, and I did not think I was going to speak tonight, but here I am. I live at 161 West Norwalk Road, so I'm not directly affected by this, but Norwalk is the city that I live in. And I find it a little interesting that before this actual session started, we were talking about a land trust. Is that correct? And we were talking about saving space for the land trust. We were talking about saving space for the land trust. And I think that everybody kind of voted that's a good idea. Yes, no? One person didn't. And I have fox living underneath my barn. I had a bobcat come back last night. So as far as the wildlife that's in that area, there's a lot of it. But why are we trying to save 4 acres when we're destroying an entire city? It seems a little counterproductive. I like the fact that people want to live here. And when people want to live here, prices go up. That is just a fact of life. There is other ways to be able to bring new people into our community without completely changing, what is it, 50% of the zoning? Is that anybody? How much we changing? Anybody? Bueller. Anyway, it's changing a lot. So some people like living in a city, some people like living in a town. I like living in Norwalk. It's quirky, it's interesting. There are a lot of small communities that are affected, and Fred said it best. You can't just take a big brush and just paint Norwalk as one thing. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you.
Lisa Britton, 19 Shorefront Park. I want to just tap into something that Fred Wilms brought up, and he said that we weren't Stamford. You're right, we're worse than Stamford. We're more densely populated than Stamford. The other thing that's happened in Norwalk that didn't happen to Stamford is our downtown has been cut into a quadrant. Wilton was able to stop Route 7, we didn't. This is another example in terms of the upzoning. It's something that at least I'm pleased to see the neighborhood out here to try and stop this upzoning. I want to try and recap a little bit what everybody said, and I'll try to make it brief because it's going to be starting to get late. I understand the need to simplify our zoning regulations, and I appreciate what you guys have done. I also appreciate the broader housing crisis, but I see them as 2 distinct issues. Tonight, I want to address the impact of 10 years of development and 50 years of lax zoning enforcement. We've already got more diverse housing than our neighboring towns. Our streets are torn up and congested, the sewer treatment plant needs an upgrade, and our schools are overcrowded. We face budget issues. That's why no single-family neighborhood should be upzoned to 2-family, or that apartment height should be increased. One turns owner-occupied neighborhoods into multifamily rentals, effectively devaluing the middle class's single largest asset, their home. The other takes our picturesque waterfront, low-rise city and turns it into a concrete jungle. Despite ownership claims, we still can't get a straight answer on the number of owner-occupied 2-family homes. Zillow advertises them as investment properties. And over the last decade, instead of building owner-occupied condos or townhouses, taxpayers have subsidized expensive rental apartments for the politically connected developers. Here's what we face right now. We have the largest increase in population in Connecticut due to our housing increase the last 10 years. We've had historically lax enforcement where 2-family homes have become 3, 4, and 5-family. P&C's response to a complaining resident was saying it was symptomatic of a housing shortage and claimed to enforce violations. Blight and spillover parking on lawns and streets tells a different story. Add unsafe living conditions and you've got houses burning down. How long before Norwalk gets sued again by tenants sustaining injuries from a fire like they did on Wall Street a decade ago? Given our budget woes, you'd think that the lost revenue from cheating landlords or fines would be a priority for City Hall, but they're not. Maybe we should put the parking authority in charge of fines. Our schools are overcrowded with poverty and high-need students now exceeding 65%. The Board of Ed's 12% budget request resulted in 4%. 106 teaching and support staff positions won't be filled. So despite 10 years of development, we still can't pay for our schools. And I want to note to everybody in this room, Hartford and Bridgeport, who are doing this upzoning, Hartford gets 212 million for their schools in ECS funding, and Bridgeport gets 192 million. What do you think Norwalk gets? $13 million. And we have the same student demographics. So in closing, Norwalk's the second most densely populated city in Fairfield County behind Bridgeport. Our infrastructure is struggling. Our current and future housing development that is planned along Martin Luther King Boulevard to Route 1 are and will enjoy years of tax credits because they're in the enterprise or the opportunity zone, courtesy of Washington, D.C., Hartford, and our own city council. So Norwalk is doing its part to the housing crisis, but we haven't managed it very well and shouldn't be expected to carry the water for neighboring towns who won't step up. I thank you for scaling back the neighborhoods that you have, but I ask you to do more. Thank you very much.
If anyone remotely would like to speak, please raise your hand electronically now.
And then while that's happening, the next two speakers, Lisa Henderson and Richard Bonifant.
Good evening. Thank you. I'm Lisa Henderson. Oh. Heck is wrong with this thing? This one, you think?
No.
I think it was Lisa who broke it, not me. They got it? Thank you. Sorry. Lisa Henderson, Apple Tree Lane, Norwalk. We also own properties in 4 other districts, and I am a proud lifelong resident of Norwalk, though I'm not going to share how many years I'm here. I'm here to speak out against proposed changes to the residential neighborhood upzoning. Not only are you pushing this through with little public outreach, a postcard with no detailed information to homeowners after neighborhood meetings were held is a poor excuse for public outreach. The time set for those meetings were difficult for working families to attend, many who live in B single residential zones, which now will become multifamily zones. I believe that you have an obligation to continue to reach out to every homeowner and taxpayer in this city and share with them the factual change to zoning on their property. This includes the combining of AA and A, single to multi, downsizing of acreage, and a clear explanation of how street frontage zoning will affect a neighborhood and property. And of course, the change to subdivision of rear lots. A change this substantial to the backbone of our city, the taxpayers and residents, should not be rushed through and or decided on by appointed members of a committee who've demonstrated in the past that the voice of the residents doesn't seem to matter. My sister, who's a single mother of 2, was able to save some money and originally buy a condo in Norwalk with the help of family. Then she sold it and bought a small house, a single family home in the Loughbury neighborhood. Currently, that neighborhood, which is a B zone, is slated to become a 2-family zone. This is a neighborhood filled with small homes on small lots where the streets are very narrow and difficult to maneuver when cars are parked on the street. Why is it that this neighborhood of modest homes will be downgraded to a 2-family zone, yet other B zone neighborhoods in close proximity have been spared? Why is it that the commission has revisited certain neighborhoods and now exempted them from upzoning and degrading their neighborhood? Is it who you know, how loud you protest, or how deep your pockets are? With so many quality of life issues not being addressed, zoning violations, illegal apartments, lack of adequate school funding, blight, and infrastructure needs, more density is not the answer to the problems. The added density over the past 10 years has not solved any of the continued issues facing Norwalk. In my own neighborhood in Silvermine, a AAA zone, it is currently being overrun with illegal contractor vehicles and equipment blatant zoning violations. It continues to worsen each year. This is what I pay almost $20,000 a year in taxes for. It's time to put the brakes on more upzoning, especially in single-family neighborhoods, and deal with the issues at hand. Thank you.
Good evening, Richard Bonifant, 17 Park Hill Avenue. In the Betswood section here, in case you've never been there. It's a beautiful street and a beautiful neighborhood. And I'm real glad that a couple of my neighbors did come out after I sent a flyer in the whole neighborhood. Right? I'm speaking on behalf of our neighborhood in the Betswood section, but also for other single family areas that are being under attack to be converted into two-family zones. Like other people have said, we bought our homes in neighborhoods, knowing the rules of the zone, and this is where we decided to live. We weighed all the options, we looked around and said, this is where we want to live. And we went and we considered that that was going to be the rules that went with it. I think you've heard most everyone in this room, when they speak to you, they're looking for those magic words that's just going to convince you to just back off. All right. Some people coming up here angry. Some people are coming up here playing the violin. Some people are, they want to say what it's going to take for you to back off. Okay. Now, you claim you're trying to create home ownership opportunities, but who's kidding who? In the last several years, you've approved 10,000 rental luxury units in the city of Norwalk. Come on. All right, so please don't go trying to solve the affordable housing problem by trashing the single family zone. If approved, Mr. Kleppin's revisions will forever alter the beauty and character of our neighborhoods, encourage tear downs or conversions into two families, and simply be marketed as real estate investment rental opportunities. Absentee landlords will rent out both sections of the houses, resulting in street parking issues, generate additional noise, degrade our quality of life, and have fresh dog crap on your yard every day. Okay? I'm asking you to listen to the people and leave the single family zones alone. And that would have been it. But I did hear two things tonight from the audience and from the presentation that I just want to make a comment on. When I hear on Westport and Connecticut Avenues and on the main drags, like Main Avenue, that you want to put the parking in the back of the stores and not the front, well, that does create safety issues because people get a little scared parking in the back. And it also becomes a problem for the abutting residential neighborhoods in the back with like loud parties and broken bottles and things like that when the stores close. And just one more thing, you know, I got nothing against the bike walk agenda type of thing, but somehow I just can't picture people driving up to Stu Leonard with their bicycle and throwing that Thanksgiving turkey in their backpack and letting the ice cream melt on their way home. But thank you.
Paul Chenard, please unmute and state your name and address for the record.
Thank you, sir. My name is Paul Chenard, 36 Windsor Place. I have to say I'm in favor of these zoning rules and regulations. It's unfortunate some of the dual family household zoning was scaled back. That's something that we should probably reverse if possible. The reason why we have a housing crunch is because we are undersupplied. I mean, it's a typical economic situation. We need to increase density. We're experiencing these issues now, and everything looks like it's happening so fast because we didn't act on anything in the years before. So everything's happening at once. This is what happens when we don't plan ahead and we don't implement things in a slow manner, but now we have to catch up. So I'm in full favor of these zoning changes. So they're very thoughtful. It's a lot of work. Most of the city's not going to be zoned differently. It's just kind of a consolidation. Most of these zoning areas that are single family but will be rezoned two family probably will never ever become two family because most families will stay in their homes for quite a long time. So I'm very thankful for the work you guys are doing. I am in full support of the zoning change. I look forward to it happening. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Mr. Chenard, I apologize. I couldn't tell for certain whether you gave us your address.
Sorry about that, sir. 36 Windsor Place.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Next two speakers, Suzanne Breyer and Thomas Mulligan. Then it'll be Thomas Mulligan and Joe Santo. That's okay. Then we have Paul Welty and
Joe Santo. Go ahead. Don't forget Joe.
Good evening. My name is Paul Welty. I live at 45 Devil's Garden Road. I believe I heard at the beginning of this meeting that Devil's Garden Road was actually removed from that list of.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, I still speak for, the city of for the other neighborhoods of Norwalk about, I want to reiterate what, just everybody said about the character of the neighborhoods, the long-term appreciation of the neighborhoods. I think, there's the affordability of housing has a lot to do with the zoning restrictions in the towns around us. And I just don't think that long-term, it's in the residents of Norwalk's best interest to just keep carving up lots, adding more traffic to the streets. It's just gonna make the city more transitory. More two-family houses will mean more renters or more people that don't show up at meetings like this because they're not invested. And I think that that's something that has to be considered too, is how much of a percentage do we want to encourage Norwalk to be renters? I mean, we don't want to, it is a city. It's not a small town, I get that. But just to sustain the city, I mean, how much renters do, and how much does Norwalk have to absorb? All the towns that people mentioned before. I mean, we kind of got to, how did we get to this place? Years, decades of restrictive zoning in other towns. So maybe Norwalk needs to, our next consultant that we should hire is how do we make a compelling argument to the state and our neighbors, the surrounding towns, that they need to loosen up their planning and zoning to allow more housing stock to be there. The gentleman that spoke earlier that said, I would love for all my friends to come in here and be able to move to Norwalk. I think if other towns adopted less restrictive and zoning and wanted to encourage more affordable housing and a more diverse population in their town, he might say, hey, you know what? That's a pretty cool development over there. They got a lot of restaurants over there. They have a lot of stores over there. I'd like to move over there too. I mean, there's just too much land in other places that it just makes too much sense that we got to think that other people have to start thinking about how they can start developing in other areas and bringing and allowing people in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Joe Santo, 14 Eugene Drive. I'm very familiar where you guys are. I spent time on the zoning commission from Mayor Esposito to Mayor Rilling and served with Mr. Mushak for a while. And I'm not going to repeat what's been said, but I think we're dealing with semantics here. This is not upzoning, this is downzoning. Taking a higher zone, A, AAA to A, B to C, you're down zoning. You're not making the zone up, you're making it down. So when you have a B residence zone, people moved into that neighborhood expecting single family. And you should not do that. The change you're trying to make, you need to hold off on it. And don't affect the people that bought single family homes expecting to have that for the rest of their time that they live there. It is down zoning, not up. Thank you.
Maureen, if you can unmute and state your full name and address for the record. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Maureen Sontag. I live at 78 County Street. I've lived here more than 50 years. And my parents bought the house back in the 60s. And the point that I'd like to make is, well, we've already talked about it, but we'll talk again, parking. Because if you change the one family zone, the single family zone into two family housing, then you really change how many cars that new house would have. Because when I grew up, there were 6 of us in this house, which is a small house. It was a cape. Most of the houses along County Street and Strawberry Hill are small houses on small pieces of property. We can't, if we put a big house on them that contains 2 families, the whole property is the house. There is no room for cars. And there could be a possibility of, I had 6 in my family, 6 cars. And if you had another family there, that's another at least 4 cars. So 10 cars, where are you going to put 10 cars? There's no place to put that many cars, and you haven't thought that through. And part of County Street, in the plan that you presented that has been modified, and I haven't seen a modification because I couldn't access the map, basically said that one side of County Street was going to be zoned one way and the other side a different way, which makes no sense to me at all. And these houses were here before any of the condos came in or even the high school. So you're actually, we've kept our lawns nice and kept our house nice. And if you change that, you know that, first of all, the front yard's going to be all cars. And we can't park on the street, which is a good thing, but the street is so busy as it is that where's all this new volume of people? Where are they going to go? There's just not room for all of that. And it's a real shame that it feels to me like the people who came up with the plan don't live here, and the people who came up with the plan didn't look at the neighborhoods and didn't look at the houses to know that I have 1/3 of an acre. That's small, okay? Part of that 1/3 is my house, part of it's the driveway, etc. But if it becomes a 2-family house, it's going to be all house with hardly any driveway and no room for anything. So I'm really sad that this came about without any input from us because you didn't want to hear from us. And now that it's at the end where you've already had this great plan developed, that somehow I'm hoping that you'll listen, but history has shown that you don't listen to us. And I just want you to know that this plan does not do Norwalk anything good. It turns out badly for us homeowners who've been here for so long and who love this city. And now what's going to happen is we're going to sell and we're going to get out. And maybe that's what you want, but it shouldn't be what you want because it's a bad plan and you need to rethink it. And for all the people who live in the area, I mean, not just this area that are affected, that it's like you didn't really think about the neighborhoods and the people who live in them, who care for their property, who do everything we're supposed to do. And you're going to change that so that all we're going to have is big houses. Do you know that County Street right now, it's so busy as it is and we can't park on the street, and that's a good thing. But it's so busy right now that if each house had like 10 cars, you wouldn't be able to move on County Street at all. And nobody's doing anything about that sort of part of the problem. You're not even addressing that part of the problem. So before you actually come up with a plan that's supposed to work for all of us, you should really have thought through these other pieces that all of us who live here think about all the time. And thank you very much for that, for allowing me the opportunity to speak on this. And good luck with all this. The end.
Next two speakers, Crystal Lane and David Bailey. Next is Roberta DiBisceglie.
Crystal is here. I'm Roberta. Where's Crystal? Okay, okay.
Hello, good evening. My name is David Bailey. I live at 39 Brookline Avenue. That's kind of in the Golden Hill area that's being disputed one way or the other. I do want to just point something out for the woman who was talking about East Norwalk. Just coming here to this meeting, I don't know if you've noticed this, but just getting off of 95, that exit ramp, we're backed up all the way across the bridge. That's how busy that is now. So, but without getting into all the weeds of traffic, parking, all the things that you've heard, these bristly topics and comments, my question is this. Our house, when we bought it, and we've been in this neighborhood for 39 years, that whole Golden Hill area. And just this morning, I walked down to the train station like you're wanting to accommodate people to do, went into the city, came back and walked back home again. That's what that neighborhood is good for. And I understand that's what you're trying to create, that kind of environment. My point is that environment's already there and the congestion's already there. And I get that you're wanting to make affordable housing. I heard people complain they can't afford it. Why is that our fault? That isn't our fault. I mean, to degrade our properties to accommodate other people and the situation that's out of our control is not something we should be penalized for. And I want to tell you something on that train ride into the city. I took the time to read all the comments that people had written in and you guys, your committee has responded to. I saw a lot of cut and paste and I get it because a lot of the comments were repeat. But the comments didn't seem to be addressing the issues that the people were trying to bring up that were valid and citing no report or no studies have been done to show that's going to devalue property, things like that. That's not going to help the people who obviously see the multifamily homes and see what happens to the neighborhood, see what happens to that property when it's not taken care of. That's the concern that we have. And I think you've heard it from many people. Just going ahead and broadly changing single family homes into multifamily homes or two-family homes isn't fair to us, especially without our voice. And you said you reached out. Well, we started a petition in our neighborhood and 63 homes and over half of them responded. Only one person's for it. Everybody's against it. So I would submit, I don't think it's been listened to. We never got any card from you. We never got any, and I think our other neighborhood over didn't get it either. So it didn't go out to everybody. And that's probably part of the perception that we have then is that this is being done without any consideration for hearing from us. But I'm glad you're here tonight because you are listening to us and I appreciate that. Despite a comment I heard at the end of the last planning and zoning meeting that was on Zoom, where it was stated that this is our decision and our decision alone. And it's important to remember that. I couldn't believe I heard that. It may be your decision to propose something, but it's our neighborhood, not your neighborhood. And for you to just arbitrarily change our neighborhoods without hearing from us, which you are hearing tonight, and I hope you're listening, and you heard that last Zoom caller comment that she didn't think you were listening. I hope you truly are listening, and that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Roberta DiBisceglie, 2 Osborne Avenue, Norwalk. My husband and I bought our existing conforming 2-family home in East Norwalk in 2004. We knew when we purchased it that we were living in a 2-family zone. For much of my adult life, I lived full-time in a rented tenement apartment in Greenwich Village. After my husband and I bought our home, we started coming to Norwalk on weekends and it was a welcome respite from city life. In 2017, we moved here full-time. We understand and appreciate how difficult it is to find true affordable housing. Indeed, we could have never purchased our home had we not had the rental income from our downstairs unit. In our early years of home ownership, we needed this income so we could pay our mortgage. Now it helps us pay for repairs and maintenance on our home. We know how important owner-occupied homes are. The concern for us is when you create investment opportunities for real estate developers who are in it for the money, not for the good of the community. We would not be opposed to changing zoning in some neighborhoods to multifamily if they would indeed be owner occupied, much in the same way you would regulate ADUs to require owner occupation. We are opposed to how you are making these decisions. What makes Golden Hill different from East Norwalk? Why are you upzoning to multifamily zoning on the blocks closest to the entire corridor you've just upzoned to EVTZ? Your decisions occurred to us as arbitrary, although we find it interesting that you've decided to scale back upzoning in neighborhoods where commissioners live. East Norwalk has already been upzoned three times in the last 10 years. 230 East Avenue, TOD zone, and now the EVTZ. Why must you continue this assault on our once charming historic neighborhood? In the TOD study, we implored you to reinforce the small town feel of this community. That would preclude allowing 3.5 stories as of right on East Avenue. The current EVTZ will already create excessive density in East Norwalk. Instead of spurring affordable housing, I believe the plan is more likely to squeeze lower income residents out of the area. This plan benefits upper income residents, big developers, and real estate investors. More people equal more costs for infrastructure and reduced quality of life for us all. Already, Norwalk does a lousy job of enforcing. We've heard a lot of that tonight. There are many illegal and dangerous multifamily homes resulting in overcrowded conditions, noise pollution, and spillover parking. Does Mr. Baker's assertion that illegal apartments are simply testament to the need for more housing suggest that at some point there would be no more illegal rentals? I find that hard to believe. I also don't believe that density is going to drive down the cost of housing. We need only look to our neighboring New York City, which was my home for many, many years, to see how disingenuous this statement is. East Norwalk has streets and other infrastructure that were developed hundreds of years ago, and the number of cars and residents here is already well past carrying capacity. Once again, I would love to have an update on residential parking passes. Your so-called walkability plan is not going to change that. Already, I walk and bike as much as possible, but there are many errands that require a car, as does my job. And I want to note, I mean, my husband and I live together. We're a two-family household and half of a two-family house. He doesn't drive. We have one small car in our family. I rent space for my work vehicles. It's still virtually impossible to park. I mean, parking is real. This is not pretend, guys. You're overdeveloping this area, which is violating our right to quiet enjoyment of our homes, overburdening schools and infrastructure, and threatening our watershed. We are opposed to this level of upzoning, not just in East Norwalk, but throughout our fair city. Stop increasing density for the sole purpose of population counts and maximizing tax revenue at the expense of the quality of life for those of us who already live and pay taxes here.
It's now 8:30, and this was the last speaker on the list.
We have a small.
Pardon me?
We have some more that came in.
Okay, that's fine. Then let's finish up. Let's finish up the list. Pardon me?
We won't get through this by 9. So if you want to, if your plan is to go till.
I'll ask the commission. Would you prefer to take the break now or wait until 9 o'clock? It's not up to
Now.
commission members who may need bathroom breaks and the like.
I vote for now.
We'll take a 10-minute break now. We'll get back together at 8:42. All right. Do we have to start recording again? We're good? Okay. We're back in session. Brian, I think what we're going to do now, since there are relatively small number of speakers in-house, but still some on Zoom, let's finish off those of you who are here, and then we'll open it up to the Zoom callers. Brian, you want to call the first two?
Sure. First is Jessica Braz, and then after Jessica is Sonia Suarez. Following Sonia is Juan Lima. Jim Anderson.
Yep.
Jim Anderson, 2 Old Well Court, deja vu. I was here for the Mill Pond. I spoke about that. I'm obviously against a lot of what you are proposing, but I'm not going to repeat what was said. I do want to talk about something that is logical. And I've been a utility worker, electric and water, for 35 years, and also a property manager for 20 years. So I have kind of both aspects of the infrastructure and the relationship of owners, investors, and renters. First, the infrastructure. I actually designed West Avenue, the electrical system myself. So I know electrically what that can handle and what it can't, water-wise also. As far as the renters and owners, and that has validity to it, affordable housing, you're kind of bending to a developer, an investor, and they want their maximum profit, as proven with Mill Pond. We asked to scale back, and that's obviously not happening. The only thing that I saw wasn't mentioned is the diverging intersection that the state of Connecticut is building. We all can see that. At exit 16, it's going to be the first intersection to be built in Connecticut. And that will essentially, and it's been proven in work, will increase the traffic that's on 95 north and southbound to go into East Norwalk and West Norwalk. And that means that valve, if you think of a plumbing system, that valve is going to get a lot bigger. Those cars are going to get off of 95 north and south and go into East Norwalk and go into West Norwalk, increase traffic flow faster. You already know the streets are limited, Gregory Boulevard, Seaview Avenue. It just doesn't make logic. So please consider that. What else? From my street, I see already, and I saw it on Memorial Day weekend at 1 o'clock, the park was closed down. I live a half a mile away. I can clearly see the Gregory Boulevard was shut down. I live right behind the Mason Lodge. I can see the cars stopped. I witnessed police cars and an ambulance trying to get through the traffic. They could not. There is a senior center that is at the Ludlow Center there. They repeatedly get ambulances and emergency vehicles. Speaking of the high rise, I did take a Citizen Police Academy last October. I'm going to do it again. We have an excellent police department along with the fire department. But I fear for them when they have to go inside a high-rise apartment building. I may not look it, but I do come from the Bronx, and I know what a high-rise and the dilemma of hiding in stairways and what goes on in long hallways, and trying to be an EMT worker and getting to someone who's in distress. Please consider that also. I mean, that's I wouldn't want to live in a place like that. That there's a possibility that the police may not get to you in time, or an EMT worker may not get to you in time. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you really looking at this and listening to everyone. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
We have Lisa Roger and Mary Dies.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Roger and I live at 11 Hayes Avenue in East Norwalk. I have attended planning and zoning information sessions in person and at City Hall and via Zoom with Steve Kleppen. Mr. Kleppen often states that one of the premises of converting one family zoning to two-family zoning is to give people an opportunity to own homes in Norwalk. Two-family home could be designated as two condominiums, making it more affordable for families to purchase homes in Norwalk. And I'm simply not following that logic. And I have questions that I would like to be addressed. Where is the data that substantiates this claim? Currently, how many two-family condo units are there throughout Norwalk? And what areas are these located in? Are there comparable cities like Norwalk that have undergone such a zoning change? Has that shown an increase in home ownership in those areas? In my opinion, this will have minimal impact or no impact on increasing home ownership opportunities. And actually, as other people have said, provide more opportunities for absentee landlords. And in fact, it could have an adverse effect, as people have also stated. People may not want to purchase in a potentially more densely populated neighborhood, and instead of considering homes in a single family area, move to other affordable towns, cities in Norwalk or elsewhere. And just a couple of other comments from other speakers at the meeting. I do agree with Fred Wilms. Instead of asking, how is this plan detrimental to me, focus more on how does this benefit the citizens of Norwalk? I do not feel that upzoning promotes affordable housing. It just, and I agree with another resident who spoke that owner occupied homes would help with rentals in the area. And I don't understand what makes Golden Hill and Shorefront Park and some of the other areas that were reverse upzoned different from East Norwalk.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm a little taller. Hi, my name is Mary Dies. I'm from Oakfield Road. And if you look at the map, there's the Golden Hill area, and then Oakfield Road is a part of a chunk of neighborhood right below Fairfield Avenue. So it's kind of cut by Fairfield Avenue. And the area, as far as I'm aware, the entire thing is Golden Hill. I'm not sure technically designation parking, I know it's a part of it. But what I want to speak to, I am not in favor of upzoning the single family homes. But what I want to speak to is kind of when you look at the map top down, it does make sense to expand. I live in South Norwalk. This is the area. It does make sense to expand the area that I'm in to two family and multifamily, especially given that like Fairfield Avenue cuts it. It's sandwiched between Fairfield Avenue and West Avenue. But I think there's something that is really interesting, and there's validity to visiting these neighborhoods, because even though top down it makes sense, when you visit these neighborhoods geographically, like where I live is a little bit like what is it, Switzerland, where it has like the mountains dividing it. We live on top of a hill and the neighborhood has enclaves, and even people from some of the surrounding neighborhoods, some of the surrounding apartments on Fairfield Avenue and whatnot, come down to my neighborhood to walk because it's safe. And to give you an idea, it used to be, 100 years ago, it used to be a horse track. And so it has a roundabout where families and people walk their dogs and we see new people, but everyone in the neighborhood welcomes that because they know it's a safe place to walk in between West Avenue and Fairfield Avenue. And so I think there's something to be said about visiting these neighborhoods because they are sectioned off. And I think that's what's wonderful about Norwalk is you find all these little pockets of homes where these neighborhoods are. And granted, again, top down, not knowing and understanding the geography and the people who live there, it might make sense to expand in that manner. But when you visit there are neighborhoods and pockets and cultures that have developed in these communities that really support and build up Norwalk and are really invested in the town and participate in boards and such. So I just wanted to make a comment that, the people who live in these neighborhoods and are fighting for these neighborhoods are committed to Norwalk and want to see it succeed, but also want to preserve the communities that they have as well. Thank you.
We have Sarah Hunter and then Diane Cece.
Hello there, Sarah Hunter, 17 Schofield Place. So I would say my point here is going to be revisit the why on why you're doing this, because Mr. Kleppen got up at the beginning and he said, here's why we're proposing this. And going through that, one of the first points was to simplify the zoning. I'd say, but why do you need to simplify it? What is the benefit of simplifying it and at what cost? If you're painting it with a broad brush to simplify it, you end up having all these situations where you've got a lot of angry residents who have their unique situations, bought their homes in their positions of single family home. And I'm specifically looking at the point of taking single family zones and trying to upzone them to more than one family. People bought their homes and are highly invested in single family homes in the neighborhoods that they picked. And to simplify zoning in order to do what? I'm not quite sure what it does when you look at that and stack it up against people who bought their homes and their lives. I don't think simplifying the zoning really buys the people of Norwalk anything. The POCD was also mentioned as one of the whys that we would do this. And I've actually been here a lot of years, and 20 years ago maybe, and then about 10 years ago, been part of the workshops on the POCD. To my knowledge, the POCD doesn't really do anything other than it's a nice guidance document, but I don't know that anybody's ever gone to the POCD and said, this is actually a zoning restriction or a zoning call that we have to make based on the POCD. I don't think it actually, I don't see what one has to do with the other here. When we said one of the other points was to concentrate development near transit, and that's just common sense. It is and it isn't. Yes, you want more density near transit, but what's near and what matters? If you have a single family home that happens to be near transit and it's on a small lot, say 1/10 of an acre, making that multifamily makes it ridiculously dense. So I don't think you can paint that with a broad brush either. I think you have to look at the lots. There was one moment at the beginning of this where there was a picture that you had up in your presentation, Mr. Kleppen, that showed 2 lots. One was on the left. It showed a sketch drawing of a single family home, and then the same size lot on the right, having changed it to a 2-family. And it's innocuous looking enough, but what it didn't have was cars. And it didn't have any of the other abutting neighbors that would be along that way too. So if you take one home, one place, and you make it 2-family and it has no cars, it's on the same size lot, doesn't look so bad. When you go to our neighborhoods and you look at what that would actually do to start doubling up on all those homes in those small lots, it's a very big difference. I mean, you're not going to get double if you have a small lot, you're not going to get double the driveways. You're going to have that much more parking on the street. Everybody's already talked about traffic and parking. I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to say, if you paint with a broad brush, just based on zip codes and areas, you're missing the point that the size of the lot is what should dictate what is too much density or not. So revisit the why on how many things you're saying are the reason for proposing any of this, because I'm not seeing it stack up against what I'm hearing from residents. Also, I should mention, because I am on the NNA, I'm speaking as a resident, not as a part of the neighborhood association. So then when we talk about developing a hybrid code, that was one of the other reasons. I don't see why that's a why either for doing this. It sort of seems like an esoteric reason when you have people who are already invested in living here in the lifestyle that they want. Everybody's mentioned it. There's nice neighborhoods. We all moved here because we like it. So then there's another thing that sort of seems to be missing from the picture, other than cars, which is what really happens when you take a single family up to a multifamily. Number of people have said it. I'm just going to hit the point again. You're not actually getting more home ownership out of it. And there are studies I've looked up and stuff. You're not going to get more affordable home ownership out of buying half of a duplex. They get bought by landlords. They turn into investment properties. They don't live here. As Roberta mentioned, it's a very big difference when it's owner occupied versus not. So there, you're just opening up a big can of worms to a lot of problems that we already know don't get enforced well to start with. So I wonder about the why. I wonder what's really going on here. Why would this be proposed the way it has been proposed? It seems like there's got to be some other motivation, but I don't know what it is. And I'm hoping that instead you're listening to the residents and what they have to say, because everybody is pretty darn forceful about this. I did see something that said no more minimum lot sizes. I'm just hoping I read that wrong because I can't even imagine how somebody would come up with that. There was a moment when it started to go down the road, this conversation overall of there's a national housing crisis. There's a lot of people with, I don't know if it was Adam Blank or whatever, but the song, the trope about affordable housing, national housing crisis. Why is that Norwalk's fault? It's not Norwalk's problem to fix, in my opinion. And other people mentioned as well, there are a lot of towns around here with a lot of free space to add some density and some housing. I grew up in New Canaan. I get it. It's beautiful. I know why they want to protect it. I wanted to live in maybe New Canaan or live in Stanford or whatever when I bought my house. I couldn't afford it. My job wasn't enough to afford living in a town I couldn't afford. So I moved to a town with a nice neighborhood, single family home. I live on 1/10 of an acre because I found a nice place to live that I could afford. So when I hear all of this about, oh, people can't afford it, I think I couldn't afford to live a lot of places that I wanted to live. And if Norwalk has become the sort of place that not everybody can afford, and it's already, you know, people are here and they like it, and the density is not something they want to see, then I think you have to respect that. So that's kind of my point there. The key takeaways are really the idea of changing single family homes to 2-family or more than 1 family is just cruel to the people who've already spent years and years paying taxes and making this their home, and they love it here, including me. So I hope you'll reconsider.
Thank you, Diane Cece. Mr. Chairman, actually, you know, I wear 2 hats. So what I would like to do is just make a couple of brief comments tonight as a resident and homeowner here. And then at next week's meeting, after we get some more information from staff and have another opportunity to review the most recent changes, I'll be making a statement on behalf of the board of the ENNA.
That's fine.
Thank you. What I wanted to speak about tonight then is just to make some clarifications and what I think are corrections to what the folks who are still here and people who have left have heard early in the evening. And I'd like to get that on the record tonight. I may actually repeat it next week, but I just want folks to be clear that there are kind of a couple of different ways to look at things. And we understand with public hearings that we don't really get a chance to rebut the rebuttal, but we do know that a lot of the things that people raise as issues, questions, and concerns, ultimately staff has an answer to it, but there's really no dialogue back and forth with the community. So that's why, in fact, we had asked for these 2 meetings to be held as forums instead of legal public hearings. But nonetheless, I'd like to get it on the record. So in terms of some of the things I wanted to clarify, I think that someone had said that this was one of the plans and studies that probably had most public exposure out of all the ones that we've done, like in the past 10 years. And I would say that while it may appear that way to folks who are close to it in the city, in reality, there's probably 90% of the people who live in the city have no idea what's going on with this right now, because of the limited exposure in terms of social media, the way the postcard was developed, et cetera. So I think maybe not with this, but again, I would urge you to continue to improve communication and how we get information out to folks. Another point that was made was that this was one of the plans that had the most extensive amount of time invested in it, from the time that you first approved it to look at it to begin with at the 2019 POCD. And then it was taken up in earnest in terms of bids for 2020. So why is that important? It's important because the city itself and staff and the consultants had 2 years and 3 months to work on this plan. Even the commission themselves, when you would look to get monthly updates from staff, you didn't get the type of updates and feedback where maybe you could have considered some of these controversial items early on. You simply got feedback from staff saying, we're still working on it. The consultant's making a lot of changes. We expect to have something soon. I observed most of your meetings, as you know, and I don't recall seeing any meeting that had the type of feedback with a presentation that staff was able to give you, like they did for the water side plan, for the industrial studies plan, for the TOD plan, and the EBTZ zone plan. So essentially, there was nothing. That would be bad enough if that was just it. What the result of that was, is that the public only really saw this for the first time, and I'll clarify the dates, but I believe it was April 22nd. And so there was virtually no time between then and now for the public to really digest this massive plan. In fact, as you know, that presentation, staff decided to even withhold the map that showed all the changes. And I think we see now why they withheld it from the first meeting, because it's just that controversial. When you take that into account, that they withheld the map from the public until I believe it was mid-May, and now have subsequently made more changes to the map based on feedback they had with other presentations. Now we're looking at the public has really had about a week and a half to 2 weeks to digest this, to come and speak to you tonight. I'm sorry, I'll try to get through this as quickly as I can. Someone mentioned, and maybe Mr. Schulman at the beginning, that this is a type of plan where none of you would expect that 100% of the people are going to come out and support it. But I would suggest to you that if staff had come back to you with a plan that stuck to what the public thought the goal was, the simplification of the language, the consolidation of some of the confusing zones, clarifying some of the actual land uses that you could do on a parcel, and removing objectionable uses that people have been asking for years. Had that been the result of what this study came back with versus what we saw with the zones changing for single family to 2-family, there probably would have been nearly 100% buy-in to this. Another rationale that was given for the plan for the why was in terms of focusing the density in the transit areas. No one that I know of is interested in saying, well, if you're going to do something bad here, then go do something bad to another neighborhood. We don't feel that way. But we do feel justified in saying that if you're looking at transit, and that's one of your main criteria for where you think you want to increase density for the sake of there's a train there, you have excluded Rowayton, and you've done it at the expense of East Norwalk. I believe, and I need to check the statistics, but I believe that there's actually more ridership out of Rowayton as well. This leads me to something that I think you've heard before, and I hope you'll consider before next week's hearing. The terminology, I didn't dub it, others have, the terminology that now it comes down to picking winners and losers. And that is super sad because that's not what we want to happen in our city. And we don't want to pit neighbor against neighbor and neighborhood against neighborhood. You've already heard about affordability. In the absence of some proof, I understand Mr. Baker is actually working on providing some statistics that may back that up in terms of any relationship to the type of density that you're recommending, being able to increase affordability. All of us contend that it doesn't. We've already seen it because the development that's happened to date is primarily not just market rate, it's luxury market rate, especially in East Norwalk. In terms of East Norwalk itself, we have been upzoned 3 times. And maybe we're using a slightly different definition because it's a new word to us. But there was the original TOD designation long before a TOD study was done. We call it spot zoning. I know that you don't agree, but it's 230 East Avenue. And it resulted in 189 apartments there. The second upzoning was a total zone, the 2-mile radius around the East Norwalk train station so that you could comply with the fundamental tenets of TOD. And that was the second thing that was enacted. And then finally, the third thing is the East Avenue Village Transit Zone, which was upzoned to allow the maximum height and density along the East Avenue corridor. When we looked at that, Mr. Baker pointed out to us that that was only 84 parcels in that corridor going from I-95 down to Cemetery Street. I think that the people in this room and who are listening and who watch this tape need to know that it may be 84 individual parcels, but the amount of density that's allowed under how that regulation went through allows for upwards of 1,100 units if it's ever completely built out. So it could be 84 parcels, but it's a lot of density. And then you take into account Cemetery Street, which is kind of an offshoot of of that zoning and was upzoned on its own, given its own parameters to allow 77 units to be there. Another thing that I think needs to be clarified is that getting information about exactly what's changing on these maps, what exists now in terms of what's allowed, and what is going to change under these maps. Thank you, Mr. Kleppen, for providing the spreadsheet that you did for me. I read this stuff all the time. I'm very engaged, as you know, and I actually had to call Steve and have him walk me through some of the stuff on the phone because I couldn't understand it. An important thing for people to understand when you talk about the fact that there's only a small portion of East Norwalk that's related to transit that you're looking to upzone. I actually did an initial count and I thought I came up with 160 parcels. And I thought that was pretty horrifying myself, just based on what's already been upzoned. But in fact, I got the information today that when Mr. Baker went back and did the analysis actually based off the streets and the maps in East Norwalk proper, it's not 160, it's 254. 254 parcels in tiny little center East Norwalk, in addition to what's been upzoned. Finally, I want to point out 2 things process-wise, and thank you for your time. Mr. Kleppen or someone pointed out that in addition to the regulations that have to do with zoning and land use, that you are looking to put in some of the improvements that we have asked for, residents and associations have asked for years, to improve public notification to abutting neighbors and to neighborhoods whenever an application of magnitude is coming through. However, what he failed to say is that requiring a placard to go up to alert the neighbors that there's an application for a development there. There's no intention to put that up when the application comes before you or across the desk of zoning. When I went back and I reread the specs, the placard would only go up at the time that the public hearing is scheduled. And so essentially you're giving people 10 days notice. So I almost want to say it's better than nothing, but honestly, it's kind of a false sense of security for people to understand what could happen in their neighborhood. So I think that needs some clarification so people understand the scope of what you're looking to do. And then finally, I think that a lot of the focus has been on the upzoning in terms of increased density, especially one family to two family. But I want to point out, and I remind people as well, and I'll talk about this next week as ENNA, that people also need to take a look at that very excellent chart. Thank you so much to the consultants. There's now a chart that has the 14 new zones going across the top. And then along the left side gives you all of the possible uses. And within the grid, as Mr. Kleppen pointed out, you can see what's permitted, what's not permitted, et cetera. So that's a very handy tool, but I don't think a lot of people have been paying attention to it because of kind of the monster they've been looking at in terms of what the upzoning is. And so I hope that people will pay attention to that because I think that there'll be requests that we'll certainly be making to remove some objectionable uses altogether. And so I think it's an important point that that you should make with the public. I went much longer. I'm so sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next is Peter Shish. And then if Jessica Braz or Sonia Suarez or it was Juan Lima, any of those folks have come back?
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Pete Skimica. I'm at 43 Seaview Avenue. And I just want to talk about probably a little bit different type of upzoning. We're already, obviously, as you know, Seaview Avenue multifamily, and have been, since the beginning of time. So my understanding and reading of the proposal is that Seaview Avenue, along with much of that area, would be zoned as CD4W, which would allow for storefront. If you look at one of the comments that was made earlier by the council was, sometimes there's a mishmash of zoning with no rhyme or reason to it. But if you look at the Seaview Avenue from basically Osborne all the way to 136, it's all houses. And it was zoned commercial C and D. Residential C and D. So there was a rhyme or reason. They're houses, right? I don't understand the rationale for changing it to allow for storefronts. And another comment that was made is, zoning exists so you can't put a gas station or a slaughterhouse next to you. Well, I know the storefront wouldn't allow for a gas station, but still, it's a very different character versus the housing that's there and been there since even before the park was there. So my concerns are specifically what it would do. It would encourage, as others have mentioned, with the upzoning, encourage potentially in absentia purchasing and investment, and also the question of taxes. What does it do to people that have chosen to live there? In my case, I've been in Norwalk for 27 years and part of a family that has been on those two parcels for 5 generations, and very concerned about the commercialization of the area. The earliest commercialization efforts I could see go back to the 50s, where somebody wanted to put a heliport there. So those are my concerns, and I'd like to see if they could be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Catherine Levine, if you can unmute and state your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Catherine Levine. I live at 13 Olmsted Place here in East Norwalk. And I wanted to thank you very much to be permitted to speak. I moved here to Norwalk and I was floored by the unique quality, the history, the location. This was, I called my husband on the other coast and said, come, this is where we have to be. So I wonder, having come from a place where when you're used to this all the time, you may not recognize the value to it, but you truly have a gem here that is envied by many people. one of my journals this week had a publication, Fortune Wealth, and they recognized 50 family-friendly ideal places in the US, Hawaii included, that evoked, this is what you should be looking for. Norwalk was one of those places. So I wonder if possibly looking at that, that the value that other people have in this town. They identified median prices for single family homes. The beautiful nature in the area, culture, arts, the diversity of culture, education, quality, healthcare, hospital proximity. So this really is particularly unique. So I wonder if perhaps looking at some of the statements that were made today, that there obviously are some issues that we have, congestion and traffic and bike access and water and infrastructure. I worked previously in software development. One of the things that we were notorious for was, instead of making a fix, we continued to put repeated patches out. And I wonder if this isn't the chance to take and make a scalable solution, deal with the infrastructure changes before you expand and build and make new problems. So perhaps by looking at these trendings right now, we're in a paradigm shift between global warming, oceans rising, COVID, changes in the work dynamics for people. Is this the time to kind of fix what we have, make it better, and then take the opportunity to then look at it after these trendings have kind of established? How can we make this better? Are all office buildings rather, are they going to stay the same, or are these perhaps places that could be taken and developed into condominiums, homes for people? So I'm just looking at the polarization also that this issue has brought to people. You really polarized people and kind of brought together people that may not have been motivated, and they all want to get involved. So maybe by making this an element of the municipal elections, decisions voted by the people with good guidance, which you all have offered, and the feedback, maybe just fix what we've got, make it better with the plan that this is going to be a likely scenario, but make it so that it's going to be a good, solid, effective change for the people and for the people who will benefit by coming to live here. So that's all I wanted to say, and thank you for your time. And I keep getting that song from Joni Mitchell's Big Yellow Taxi. They paved paradise and put up a parking lot. It's not a place to go. And it would be great to make this town something that will be in the top 10 instead of the 30 position place with those 50 cities across the country. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
M. Zamor, if you could unmute, state your name and address.
Hello, my name is Monifa Zamor, and my address is 4 Bucciarelli Lane in Norwalk, Connecticut.
Please go ahead.
I thank you for having this meeting. I also do disagree with the upzoning of Norwalk for 2-family. I feel that the area in itself is getting much denser than it was. I've only lived in Norwalk for 18 years, but I've definitely seen the changes, and I really think it would be a bad idea to upzone. And that's basically all that I have. I just think it's a bad idea.
Thank you.
Adrian Wallace, please unmute.
Evening. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good evening. I am Adrienne A. Wallace, and I live at 11 June Avenue, which is in the Spring Hill area, Spring Hill Nolan Court area here in Norwalk. I love this city. I've lived here for some 24 years. Actually rented a condo on Flax Hill when I first moved here. So I'm very familiar with South Norwalk, and then now more familiar with the western side of Norwalk. And I really appreciate everyone's efforts tonight. I've been on with you all since 5:30. So really appreciate the efforts of my community members, as well as the zoning and planning members here. I've heard my sentiments or the thoughts that I had, the things I wanted to talk about echoed by so many residents and taxpayers here already. And I'm just hoping that we can really strive to strike a balance between progress and preservation. As a taxpayer, I know that we have streets probably better than many streets that some of us outside of here would have had. And I know that we probably have a better school system than many, many school systems. I've taken my niece from the New York City school system and brought her to live here because I know the difference. However, I do think that the upzoning or the creation of splitting single family areas into multifamily or two-family zones is something that does not serve us. Basically, we have to have the wisdom to protect what it is that we have and what it is that Norwalk offers, not only to us, but to our elders and to our children. And that is a true sense of community. You don't get that in high density areas. We also are coming out of, and I don't have to remind anyone of this, a pandemic where, thank God, we had the infrastructure to really manage to that type of scenario. And it's not a scenario that we don't know will come again. It may be more likely than unlikely. And what are we doing with the existing infrastructure in terms of healthcare, in terms of our emergency responders, in terms of a police force, that I don't think has even 200 policemen when we look to upscale and bring in all these multifamily homes or overall large apartment buildings. I really do implore the commission and anyone involved to just lend an empathetic ear to the voice of the people, to also be a voice to the people, and to understand that the single family zones are not merely structures, but they're integral parts of our collective identity here. We are not, segregated by race or anything like that in having a single family home. And I think that's one of the unique, rich things about Norwalk as a city. I just want to, as a taxpayer and to empower everyone to embrace the responsibility of ensuring that our future is just rooted in the values that we hold dear, and a future that cherishes and safeguards the sanctity of a single family neighborhood and therefore community, which is what's really important. It's not about being in a neighborhood, but it's about having a community, somewhere where our schools are not overburdened, our hospitals aren't overburdened, our first responders are not overburdened, and dare I say, our city government is not overburdened either. Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Chris, please unmute, state your name and address for the record.
Sure. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. This is Chris Trailman at 41 Brooklawn Avenue in the Golden Hill neighborhood. First, I'd like to thank you all for staying with us so late in the evening. Really appreciate it. I appreciate you hearing our comments and whatnot. And I have submitted some comments via email, so I won't reread all of those as I know they've been added to the record. A couple things I'd just like to point out, though. I've heard mentioned multiple times how high our pricing is. And I'd second that. We are high on the national average. But if you look at Fairfield County and you look at Westchester County and you look, at our neighboring towns, we are not on the high end. We are probably about on a list price, $200,000 lower than the Fairfield County median. And we're about $100,000 lower than the Westchester County median. I think those are important facts that everybody should know instead of saying that we are such a high cost market. We are nationally, but we are not in the actual areas we live in. That being said, I can appreciate that we do want to have affordable housing, but I am against the zoning changes to change single family homes to multifamily homes because I don't think that is going to drive affordable housing here. I think there are other ways to do it. I think we need to look at this a little bit closer. I do think that transit-oriented development is something that has some positives. I think there are areas of Norwalk that, we could see some great change, but I don't think we can just do this in a vacuum. I think we have to consider everybody because we are not just speaking for the people looking for affordable housing. We are speaking for every resident of this town. And I think that's another important thing that we have to think about in this conversation. Other than that, I won't belabor all the issues with infrastructure and go through everything there, but specific to my neighborhood, if you look at where Brooklawn Avenue hits Garner, you can't even get a car to pass each other there. So I don't know how we're going to deal with the car infrastructure or the car density growing with our current infrastructure. On top of that, we're not talking about electrical. What happens when Connecticut mandates electric vehicles? Do we have the power infrastructure to deal with that? Right now, our power poles can't even stay up in a light wind. Do we have the water infrastructure? I'm not sure. I don't know the answers to that, but I think all of this needs to be looked at when we talk about density. I'm not saying I have the correct answers to do all this, but I am saying these are things we need to look at a little bit closer. And I am not for these current proposed changes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marissa, if you could please unmute. State your name and address for the record, please. Marissa Santangelo, please unmute. She's gone. Next, we have Tom. Please unmute. State your name and address.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tom Danis. I live at 11 Fair Street. And we're like a little pocket in between Main Street and the Route 7 connector. It's currently a Zone C, and it's being proposed to be Zone CD4. And I'm a little concerned about this. Our neighborhood has, there's tiny lots, but they have front yards, they have backyards. We got a little bit of elbow room, not much, but I'm concerned about the zoning and the large multifamily buildings being allowed and commercial being allowed into this area. It's a great opportunity to make this a nice walkable neighborhood with the proximity to Main Street. And, we can walk to Valencia, we can walk to BJ Ryan's, that's why we moved here. And, I'm concerned with the setbacks and the heights being allowed here. It'd be tough to have a commercial building with a 0-foot setback, 3.5 stories tall in my backyard. And that's something that's just not desirable. So I'd like you guys to reconsider the zoning for this area, maybe make it a CD3 and, focus the commercial in existing CD4C areas where they need more investment in thoughtful development. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Christopher Valente. Please unmute. State your name and address for the record.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Please unmute. We heard you for a second there. All right, we'll come back to you, Christopher. Next, we have Winte. Or Wint.
Yeah, hi. Hi, my name is Steve Kovlakas. And I'm at 41 Seaview Avenue. Okay, I have a question for the committee. Basically, what's the position? I mean, I'm a little confused. Is the committee agree that population, the density is going up? Yes or no? If you can answer that, that'd be a great starting point. Because the point I want to make is that there's a question of whether density helps with affordability. Increase in density makes housing affordable. So to that end, what I did, and I invite you all to do the same, pull up your browser and use the power of artificial intelligence. There is Bing, is an artificial intelligence search engine, as well as Chat GPT. And I typed in very simply, and I asked, does increasing population density make home ownership more affordable? That was my question. The response I got from Bing says, a comparison of the density of American urban areas with their housing affordability shows a clear correlation. Density makes housing less affordable, not more. Okay, so Bing also says, according to a comparison of the density of American urban areas with their housing affordability, there's a clear correlation. Density makes housing less affordable, not more. And that's basically all I have to say. I appreciate you have a difficult job. I appreciate you for taking my my message and my call. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Dave Roger. Please unmute, state your name and address. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dave Roger. I live at 11 Hayes Avenue in East Norwalk. I'll spare the commission and the audience repeats of discussions on density and two-family and affordability and parking. I was initially concerned that my home was going to be changed from single to two-family until I looked at the maps from the website of the whole new plan and saw that my house is 11 feet within the zone of already two-family. So I guess it's no change for me there. Anyway, but my comments tonight are two kind of specific or detailed items. One related to the special district light industrial zone. They're in little pockets throughout town, throughout East Norwalk, throughout the city, usually small manufacturing that had developed over the decades here in Norwalk. And what my concern on that specific item is the permitted use of warehouse distribution and wholesale distribution. And the problem there is that these light industrial zoned facilities are generally surrounded by residential neighborhoods, and wholesale distribution and warehousing is just not compatible with single or multifamily housing for that matter. And I would recommend or request that turn into a non-permitted use for light industrial. Heavy industrial is great. They tend to be located on corridors where it's easy for the trucks and easy for services to get there. It's the light industrials in the residential neighborhoods that just wouldn't work when it comes to warehouse distribution and that kind of activity. And then my last point is related to the size of lot. And when I saw the no more minimum lot size, I was a little taken aback. And that is in my neighborhood. I live on a 50 by 100 lot, so 5,000 square feet. It really wouldn't make sense for someone to come by and say, hey, let's turn this into a two-family parcel. In the old zones and the old zoning regulations, I think the point where a two-family, multifamily house would be appropriate as, I think it was at 6,000 or maybe 6,500 square feet. And I think that just makes more sense than having no lot size rules at all. If you have a tiny lot, okay, it could happen. It's not practical, and I suppose it would not be practical to a developer. But I think a little bit of looking into lot sizing when it comes to upzoning, as the term has been used, I think might help in a lot of the neighborhoods that people are very concerned about. When you have tiny lots, you don't want to have multifamily houses there, because tiny lots mean you have more houses on narrow streets and more cars and all the other things that people have brought up. So I would recommend looking at the lot size when it comes to multifamily. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Christopher Valente, please unmute.
I'm sorry, that was a mistake. Just listening. Thank you.
Okay, if anyone else remote would like to speak, please raise your hand electronically now.
And if anyone else here would like to speak, do so now as well.
I don't see anyone.
Could you repeat the instruction for those that called in?
Yeah, so if you're remote on Zoom and you'd like to raise your hand, you can hit the raise your hand tool. It's at the bottom of your screen. If you're dialed in on a phone, you'd hit *9 and that'll raise your hand.
Hello, Carol. Please state your full name and your address for the record after you unmute.
My name is Carol Solheim. I live at 17 Overbrook Road. I own a couple of properties in East Norwalk that are two families. And I just wanted to make a point, because a lot of people have mentioned about worrying about investors coming in. And I just want to say that I routinely, almost weekly, get offers to buy my properties. I'm not interested. My husband and I are small mom and pop. We love East Norwalk. We think it's one of the best areas in town to live in, even though we don't live there anymore. I get down there a lot. But what we saw after 2008, when the market took a nosedive and people, investors and big equity firms went in and bought up lots of small houses. Florida was a big place where they went in. They're out there. They want to buy our properties, and they're going to be owned by big equity companies. If they're after my small properties, you can be sure they're going to be after any two-family or anything that can be two-family. And that's something we don't pay enough attention to. And I would not ever sell to anybody who's an equity, just buying this for equity. This is one of the things that we are also not taking into consideration, that by changing all of this, as people have mentioned before, it just allows investors to go in who do not care. I don't know if any of you remember this, but at one point there were maybe 4 or 5 houses on Seaview Avenue that came up for sale, all multifamilies. And they actually were quite reasonable. And I was talking to someone who had been in some of those houses, and he said, what a lot of these investor landlords do is they simply let their properties fall apart. They take everything out of them. They do not make repairs. And then they sell them. And that's exactly what happened on East Avenue. Unfortunately, the people who bought some of those properties have fixed them up. They were not, they're nice now, but they were lousy when they were sold. So I think we have to be aware when we change any kind of zoning, what we're also inviting in. And I don't know if anybody's addressed this. I had to leave for a while for another Zoom meeting, but that's something that I just wanted to put forward to you because it's real, it's out there. And I've even had phone calls and I've had to tell people to just leave me alone, you know, and they're not going to be sold. They're going to my kids, period. Thank you.
Thank you.
Robert, please unmute and state your name and address. Thank you. Robert, we cannot hear you. I removed it, but. All right, we'll come back to you, Robert. If you want to speak, please raise your hand again. She just spoke. Is there anyone else remotely that would like to speak? Please raise your hand electronically by clicking the raise hand icon. I do not see anyone, Chairman. Oh, there we go. Tom Belmont, please state your name and address for the record and unmute.
My name is Tom Belmont, 14 Bell Drive, Norwalk. I'm just concerned. Everybody's concerned about this zoning project. Seem to be apprehensive. I'm concerned about the traffic like everybody else. It's already tough as it is to get around. And I guess they're wondering if after the effect of the zoning, how will that, what will the effect be on the traffic? What will the effect be on the utilities, the sewage and water? I hope all of that was taken into consideration by engineers and architects or whatever. And my other concern is how often will we get rezoned? Will this be an up and coming project in 10 years or 5 years? Or will there be changes in zoning often? And another thing, is this a project that was brought down from Hartford, which in turn was brought from Washington, D.C.? I know that the administration wanted to, one of its initiatives was to build low-cost housing in suburban areas in the larger cities, and placing a condition on that, not giving out the appropriate, the usual monies or whatever for federal money, state money. It's all money. And I was just concerned about that. How often would it be zoned again? And I understand that there is intentions to build a train station in north of the Merritt towards Wilton. Was that true? Was that what I heard? To accommodate the housing in that area? I understand the housing in East Norwalk, his intentions is to be near the train station in East Norwalk. I have as many questions as everybody else. Thanks.
Can I just answer that about the train station?
Sure.
Still listening? Yeah, we haven't really been engaging speakers much, but the train station is built. It's just ready to be opened. It's the renovation of the old Merritt 7 train station that was there. They put a bridge in so you can walk over. Anyway, that's all there now. So there's no new station going in. It's just, I think, going to open any day now.
So is that to accommodate the housing in that area?
Yes, and the Class A office space that's been there for 40 years, which you always had to walk around from. It was so primitive. It was like Petticoat Junction up there. You had to get off of a train and go around to the office space. It was just stupid. So they put a bridge over so you can take an elevator up and walk over. So that's it.
So it wouldn't be required to be building new housing there.
I just wanted to answer your question about the train station.
Okay. All right, let's move on.
Okay, Robert, if we can try again, please unmute.
Might be your input audio, Robert. If we're not able to hear your comments tonight, you could always write in comments or try attending our meeting next week on the 28th.
Is that it? Okay. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak? All right, if not, then we'll close the public participation portion of this meeting. Remind you again that we'll be meeting again next week, same day, same time. Pardon me? Oh, I'm sorry. Meeting next week will be in the council chambers, will not be here in the community room. The acoustics there are very much better. And to the extent any of you have been having problem hearing this evening, I apologize. I've been having some difficulties myself because of the acoustics. Steve, do you want to make any final comments before I adjourn the meeting?
Not tonight, no. Thank you.
Okay. Motion to adjourn? Oh, okay. We have a motion to adjourn. I saw a hand. We have a second. We have 2 seconds. All those in favor? Aye. All right. Looks like it's unanimous. Chapin, Hector, Galen, I'm sorry we couldn't engage you more.
Not at all.
It's been a challenging evening for all of us.
Thank you.
See you next week. Thank
Have a good evening.
And thank you to all the attendees, virtual and in person.